Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caitlin Arquette. Lois Duncan was born on April 28, 1934, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. Later, her family moved to Sarasota, Florida. Her mother and father specialized in circus photography, were famous photographers for popular magazines. From an early age, Lois spent a lot of time surrounded by artists, which inspired her. However, she did not want to pursue photography. Instead, she dreamed of becoming a writer. Lois turned out to be a real genius. At the age of 10, she wrote her first story, which was published in a children's magazine. By the age of 13, she managed to sell her first article, and the young talent became a regular contributor to newspapers and magazines. Lois graduated from high school in 1952 and was accepted to Duke University, where she met her first husband, Joseph Cardozo. However, she was forced to quit her studies in 1953 as she chose to start a family. Despite this, she continued her writing career and published more than 300 articles. In this relationship, she had two daughters named Robin and Carrie, and later, a son named Brett. After 10 years, the marriage ended, and she moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she began teaching at the journalism department of a local university. Despite lacking the appropriate education, one of her friends held a leadership position there, which allowed her to become a teacher. While substituting for the main teachers, Lois continued writing and authored 48 books that catered to audiences of all ages, but she gained the most fame for her thrillers for young adults. Her bestseller, I Know What You Did Last Summer, earned her the unofficial title of the Queen of the Teenage Thriller, a title used by many critics and journalists. She was recognized as an innovator in literature and received awards in 16 states and 3 additional countries, including the Edwards Award in 1992. Even before these events, in 1965, Lois married for the second time to an electrical engineer named Donald Arquette, who had a son, Donald Jr. During this marriage, a third daughter, Caitlin, was born. All of Lois's children were also very gifted and achieved success mainly in creative fields. By 1989, the 3 youngest children still lived with their mother and father in Albuquerque in a large, beautiful house in a prosperous area. Caitlin Arquette, whom relatives called Kate, was born on September 18, 1970. While she lacked a strong creative streak, she was very active and sociable in high school. Unlike her creative relatives, she wanted to become a doctor and worked hard to graduate from high school on June 14, 1989. By this time, she had been dating a guy named Dung Ngoc Nguyen for about a year and a half. He was an immigrant from Vietnam, and before moving to America, he often spoke about his difficult childhood and how emigration was an opportunity for him to build a better life than he had known in his homeland. Dung was 8 years older than Caitlin, but she lied to her family, saying he was only 4 years older, as her parents disapproved of their relationship due to the age difference. After finishing school, Caitlin got a job in a clothing store and was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of New Mexico. It was a pleasant summer, but her relationship with Dung began to have problems. On July 16, 1989, Caitlin visited her family and reported that her relationship with Dung was not going as well as she had hoped. She wanted to break up with him but hesitated, reluctant to return to her family's house because she enjoyed the apartment she was renting. Dung did not want to move out and behaved defiantly, justifying himself with Vietnamese traditions, which dictated that a woman must obey a man without question, a stance Caitlin refused to accept. Despite this, she was responsible for paying rent and utilities while Dung contributed nothing. When leaving her parents' house, Caitlin told them she was going to visit her friend Sharon, whom she had met shortly before but had already become close with. However, Caitlin's family did not know Sharon at all. Caitlin left her mother's number for contact and left home at 6:15 p.m., planning to go to Frozen first and then to Sharon's house. Everything seemed to be going well until around midnight when Lois and Donald received a call from a local emergency room. 18-year-old Caitlin had been brought to the hospital with injuries, but no relatives had been provided with any information. They were told to come to the hospital. It turned out that at about 11 p.m., a patrolman noticed 2 suspicious cars on the sidewalk and decided to investigate. He found Caitlin covered in blood, lying in the front seat of her car and moaning in pain. The girl's car was severely damaged, and it appeared that she had been involved in a road accident. The police officer called for backup and an ambulance. Once the authorities arrived, they noticed that the damage to the vehicle did not match the circumstances of an accident. Experienced investigators observed that the glass on the driver's side seemed to have been shattered by gunfire, as 2 bullets had pierced the driver's window and struck Caitlin in the head. The out-of-control car had driven through 3 lanes, veered into oncoming traffic, and stopped on the sidewalk against a lamppost. Caitlin was still alive but unable to speak. She was taken to the hospital in serious condition. By that time, the assumptions about the accident looked increasingly unconvincing. Judging by the injuries sustained, the position of the car, and its condition, it appeared that someone had attacked Caitlin and shot through the side window. She suffered 2 wounds to the head. Meanwhile, after receiving initial medical assistance, the girl was connected to life support machines by doctors. They informed her family that her chances of survival were minimal. The young man whom the police found at the scene of the tragedy was questioned and later released. He was considered a mere witness who had stopped to check on the condition of the victim. He did not arouse any suspicion and was released after the details were clarified. The officers then turned their attention to the victim. A note with the address of her friend, Sharon Smith, was found in her car. Considering the suspicion that the incident might have been an attack rather than an accident, the police decided to investigate this lead. At that time, according to Sharon, they had met around 9 p.m. and had dinner together. Caitlin was very upset, frequently crying and periodically calling her boyfriend, Dung. Seeing her distress, Sharon offered to stay with her, but she refused. Despite a bad feeling, Sharon could not force her friend to stay. Caitlin was determined to leave. She left at 10:45 p.m., heading toward her parents' house, where she intended to spend the night. After learning of the conflict between the victim and her boyfriend, detectives decided to verify this information and went to the couple's apartment at about 5 a.m. Dung opened the door, looking sleepy. It seemed he had just woken up and was unaware of what had happened. He appeared shocked by the news and stated that he had spent the evening with friends, playing billiards and drinking. He had returned to the apartment around 10 p.m., had been waiting for his girlfriend to come home, but when that didn't happen, he fell asleep. His friends confirmed his alibi. Officers decided to search the apartment for important clues. Dung consented to the inspection, and they noticed a note addressed to his girlfriend, which read, "Darling, where are you? I know you're still angry. I'm so sorry, I miss you. I went to your mother's to return some books. See you with love." According to him, no one had called him at home to inform him about what had happened. The detectives also inquired whether Dung owned a gun, considering Caitlin had been shot. However, the result was negative, and after concluding their investigation, the police officers left the apartment. Dung immediately rushed to the hospital to join the girl's worried relatives. According to Lois, she heard him mutter repeatedly that it was his fault. The doctors managed to stabilize Caitlin's condition, but they soon discovered that due to internal bleeding, her brain had died. Her life was being sustained only by a life support machine. Just a few hours after the incident, her relatives realized that Caitlin would never recover, leading them to make the difficult decision to take her off life support. She was declared dead on July 17, 1989, at the age of 18. Her mother knew that Caitlin would have wanted to donate her organs to those in need in the event of such an incident. This act helped save several lives. Meanwhile, detectives informed the family that they believed the incident to be an accidental shooting. In the area in recent months, there had been an increase in road-related attacks, raising the assumption that the victim might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Several gangs were operating in the area, feuding with each other and claiming territory. On June 24, a man was shot while sitting in his car, and a day later, during a road conflict, another man was killed with 3 stabs to the heart. On July 4, a third person was shot. The frequency of these attacks was alarming. Gang members would shoot at rival gang members, and it was possible that Caitlin's car was mistaken for one belonging to a competitor. However, Caitlin's relatives did not believe this theory proposed by the investigators, who continued to insist on focusing on the local rival gangs. As a result, writer Lois took the investigation into her own hands. During an impromptu investigation, she managed to uncover that 3 attacks had been committed on the day when they were all in the hospital, coinciding with the time Dung was with them. This suggested he could not have made a call himself. But if only 2 people lived in the apartment, who had made the calls? Lois sought to trace the origin of the calls and discovered that someone had tried to contact Dung's sister, who was living in California at the time. She had just arrived from Vietnam. The woman found out that the last time they were supposed to meet was in March of that year. The girl said that she went to Disneyland with her boyfriend. However, suspicions arose that both were involved in some criminal activity concerning the girl's mother, which all seemed incredible. She could not even imagine that a decent and educated daughter, who did not need anything, could be connected with a criminal guy. Curiously, the last call from the apartment was made just a minute after Caitlin was declared dead. During this time, Dung was still in the hospital next to his beloved and her family, so definitely could not have called. As it turned out, the trip to Disneyland was connected with machinations in which the Vietnamese community had been involved shortly before. These events were staged, and all the people who suffered in it complained of various injuries in the hope of receiving compensation through the court. Dung was part of this scheme and was supposed to receive money to settle the conflict. After finding out this information, Lois went to the police and told the investigator everything. She believed that this could have become a motive for the crime. In the meantime, Dung was very upset by Caitlin's death. One night, he unexpectedly came to Lois and asked for sleeping pills because he was having trouble sleeping. He insisted that she give him the whole pack. Of course, she refused, and from that moment on, she was seriously afraid that Dung could harm himself. She was not mistaken, because just 5 days after the tragedy, he took a knife and injured himself by stabbing himself in the stomach. Friends found him in time and took him to the hospital, where he survived. The police interrogated him because they believed he might feel guilty about his involvement in the crime. Dung insisted that he was in a state of loss and depression but was not involved in Caitlin's death. Lois believed he was not guilty of murder but suspected that Dung knew more than he was saying. It seemed that he was hiding something. The fear was confirmed by the victim's friend Sharon, who said that on the night of the murder, Dung called and said that Caitlin was dead. However, according to the time she indicated, this happened much earlier than when the police came to the apartment and notified him of what had happened. This means he was lying and clearly had an idea of what had occurred. In light of this news, investigators arrested him immediately after his hospital discharge. Dung denied saying anything like that. He insisted he did not know who could have killed Caitlin. He also denied participating in any fraudulent schemes to obtain money. The owner of the apartment where the couple lived provided valuable information. It turned out Caitlin did not have a peaceful life there. She repeatedly asked to change the locks and even to spend the night with a man because she was afraid to stay in the rented apartment. It seemed her fears were directed against her boyfriend. It appeared that the nice guy Dung was leading a double life of crime and was becoming a real tyrant towards Caitlin behind closed doors. A policeman was at the crime scene, and it later emerged he was himself involved in criminal activity. The officer was fired from the police department for participating in fraud and the resale of stolen cars. During the investigation, it was discovered that Vietnamese groups were involved in the theft of these cars. The owner of the auto repair shop, where the stolen cars were stored before selling, knew Caitlin. Circumstances were such that the innocent, smart girl Caitlin got involved with a guy who was entangled in criminal activity. However, there was not enough evidence to conclusively identify the criminal. On January 11, 1990, 6 months after Caitlin's death, a confidential informant contacted the police and reported that 4 men were involved in the brutality. Information was received from the local department, leading to the identification of 4 potential suspects, including a Mexican named Juvenal. However, she considered this version far-fetched. The police showed obvious negligence, as they did not even collect the glass fragments that were shot through and remained at the crime scene. At that point, it was revealed that many reports were fabricated based on real testimonies from witnesses. However, they were detained for a reason. The truck driver became an accidental witness to the massacre and described a car he saw on the road. The police found him in January at the wheel of the car in which the attackers were seated, including Juvenal Escobedo. Trouble arose when he said that the weapon was used by Miguel Garcia, while Robert Garcia and Dennis Martinez were also in the car. Robert was detained and taken to the police station on January 17, 1990. His interrogation lasted about 2 hours, during which he confessed to participating in the crime. Following this, the other 3 participants were arrested. Robert insisted that it was Miguel who pulled the trigger, killing Caitlin, claiming that he shot 3 times at Caitlin's car. Shortly before this, he had sold his Chevrolet Camaro, and he was recognized by the truck driver with whom the police spoke that night. Later, the Mexicans denied guilt and provided no commentary. Information about their involvement in the case fell through. Unexpectedly, Robert Garcia reported that he actually did not see anything. He insisted that during the interrogation, he was simply scared because the police pressured and threatened him, so he told them what they wanted to hear. Suspicion against Miguel led to the search of his house, where several units of weapons were found, but the pistol used to shoot Caitlin was not among them. The testimonies of several witnesses were also challenged, with people getting confused about the timeline. They could not say exactly what vehicle the criminals were in, and they even provided license plate numbers that did not match the Chevrolet Camaro. By the spring of 1991, all the detained young men who were considered involved in the murder were released, as all charges against them were dropped after it was proven that they were willing to confess to anything just to avoid the wrath of the authorities. After the release of the 4 main suspects, a decision was made to speak with Dung again. During this period, he was much more open and honestly admitted to committing insurance fraud. He also reported that at least 10 other Vietnamese individuals were involved in fraudulent schemes within the insurance sector. According to him, he had lied during his initial interrogation because a friend, whose name he refused to disclose, had told him to do so. Presumably, this friend had used the phone in the victim's apartment while Dung was not there. Lois feared that there would be attempts to suppress the truth. In 1992, she wrote a book titled Who Killed My Daughter? This work attracted significant attention from the public and the media. The author hoped that this would lead to someone coming forward with information about the tragedy to help the investigation. In 1995, Caitlin's case caught the attention of a private detective named Pat Caristo, a former police officer with extensive experience, who was considered one of the best detectives in the city. Pat discovered that the young man the police encountered when they arrived at the scene of the tragedy was 21-year-old Paul Apodaca. This was the same individual who claimed he had merely been passing by and wanted to help the victim. The police had only questioned him, taken his contact information, and allowed him to leave, but he did not seem so innocent to Pat. According to the private detective, Caitlin was a victim of a deliberate act. She had been intentionally pushed out of another car onto the road. Damage to the vehicle suggested that very similar damage could have been present on Paul's gray Volkswagen Beetle, but it was not documented. After that, Caitlin was shot. The detective found out that Paul had a stormy criminal past, and his friends noticed him painting his car just a few days after the accident, which seemed especially suspicious. However, what Pat said contradicted the official version of the police. Unfortunately, her words turned out to be insufficient. In 1997, a campaign was launched to get Caitlin's case re-investigated. Finally, in 2003, the Commission to Investigate Unsolved Crimes began its work. New investigators immediately confirmed the private detective's findings. They believed that the car had not been shot at while moving, but had first been pushed onto the sidewalk and caused to collide with a pole. However, there was too little information to find new leads. Lois was not going to give up. She was advised to contact a famous psychic named Betty Munn. Lois had no illusions about such a method but decided to try nevertheless. It helped to uncover new details. The psychic firmly stated that Dung did not kill Caitlin, but he perhaps knew who might have done it. The psychic saw another car that had stopped on the sidewalk after the accident, where 3 people were crowded together, arguing animatedly about something. They all appeared to be of Asian descent. The psychic insisted that the Vietnamese mafia, which operated in the area, was not involved in the murder. She claimed that the investigation was completely fabricated and that the police tried to shift all the blame onto 4 Mexicans. This was entirely consistent with Lois and the private detective's beliefs. The psychic could not provide more details, stating that it would not be possible to solve the crime until the killer revealed himself. Additionally, during the investigation, a large number of strange incidents surfaced, showing that people who might have had information were being persecuted. It appeared that someone was deliberately obstructing the investigation. Until 2003, all 4 individuals who could have been implicated as culprits were found dead under strange circumstances. Unfortunately, all lines of investigation turned out to be dead ends. In 2014, Lois wrote a sequel to her book about her daughter's death. By this time, her family had also received threats, and she was convinced that they were coming from a Vietnamese gang. After the book was published, Lois received more serious threats, which prompted her to transition to writing children's books and to stop writing about Caitlin's case. Lois spent the rest of her life trying to solve the mystery of her daughter's death. However, she was not destined to see this through. Lois died at the age of 82 on June 15, 2016. According to her husband, Lois suffered a series of strokes that might have been a contributing factor. Her relatives continued to pursue the case, striving for a resolution, but this did not lead to visible results until July 20, 2021, 32 years after Caitlin's death. On a warm summer day, police officers arrested a man who was wandering aimlessly around the grounds of the University of New Mexico. It turned out to be Paul Apodaca, the same man who had been seen by police near Caitlin's car. At the time of his arrest, he was 53 years old and had a long history of violent crimes, including abuse offenses. During interrogation, he admitted that he had felt a deep hatred for women throughout his life. It may have been a coincidence, but the psychic had predicted that one day a man would appear who would confess to the crime out of guilt. However, Paul's account started not with Caitlin, but with confessions to the abuses of several other girls in the 80s and 90s. His statements were thoroughly checked, and each confession took several months to verify. In the end, it was confirmed that the first victim of Paul's murder spree was Althea Oakley, who died on June 22, 1988, at the age of 21. Althea was returning alone after a party due to a quarrel with a guy when she was attacked. Paul stabbed her to death for no apparent reason upon seeing her on the street. A witness heard screams and ran into the street, but upon seeing the attack, he fled. Althea died in the hospital, and the criminal was never found. His next victim was 13-year-old Stella Gonzalez, who was walking with a friend in the morning of September 9, 1988. The attacker was driving by in a car when he noticed the girls. He pulled up and, without warning, shot one of them in the back of the head while the other ran away. All these cases remained unsolved for many years, but now Paul's involvement in them has been confirmed. The man was charged with the murders of these 2 girls in December 2021. In February 2022, the charge of murdering Caitlin was announced, to which he also confessed, providing police with details that only the criminal could know. Caitlin had become yet another random victim of his violence. His choice of victims was not justified by anything. He simply drove by, saw Caitlin's car, and decided to kill her. Paul stated that he would confess out of guilt that had tormented him all these years. He sincerely repented for the pain he caused to the families of the victims. Paul Apodaca is now in prison awaiting a hearing in January 2024. For one of the crimes, the serial killer received a sentence of 45 years in prison. The case of Caitlin Arquette is a haunting story of a young life cut short and a mother's relentless search for the truth. Initially thought to be a random gang attack, the case unraveled over decades, revealing Paul Apodaca, a violent drifter with a hatred for women, to be the real killer 32 years later. Caitlin's story is a poignant reminder that justice may be delayed but is not denied if we don't give up. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Tyale Palmer. Tyale Palmer was a 12-year-old girl with her whole future ahead of her. She was an ordinary teenager, but her life ended tragically. She became a victim of terrible violence. Her mother took her to the Child Protection Center, fearing for her life because of her abusive father. The mother believed this decision would safeguard her daughter and provide her with a better future. The mother genuinely believed she was making the right decision. Her mother herself is also suffering from domestic violence. She did not want her daughter to experience the same. She was unable to raise Tyale properly due to the family's difficult circumstances. Tyale became a troubled child, little girl frequently running away from home to escape the conflicts between her parents and often resorting to vagrancy. In January 2015, Tyale, a 12-year-old girl, was placed by the Child Protection Center with a new family in an area outside Chambers Flat, about 40 minutes from Brisbane, Australia. This is a quiet, cozy place with a population of about 2,500 people. Her adoptive family was the Thorburns, consisting of Rick, his wife Julene, and their sons. The eldest son, Joshua, was 19, and the youngest, Trent, was 18. Previously, Tyale had been adopted by several families, but because she had a complex personality, not all adoptive parents were able to care for her. Some considered her quite contentious. The Thorburns were no different. Tyale was unhappy about living with two teenage boys much older than her, Trent and Joshua, but she had no choice. At that time, her adoptive parents, Rick and Julene, had been married for over 25 years. Rick, a former truck driver, had to switch to lighter transport jobs due to a serious back injury. He started a fast food business from a van and also owned a horse farm. Julene ran a home daycare. The family was regarded as very decent and exemplary in the area, which is why Child Protection Services chose them for Tyale. Within 4 months, Tyale appeared to have settled into her new family and continued living with them until the unfortunate incident that followed. She attended Marsden State High School, just a 20-minute drive from home. Her life seemed to be improving. It seemed that everyone in the Thorburn family have gotten used to her and they got along very well. However, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. October 30th, 2015 started out like any other normal day for the Thorburn family. Rick took his adopted daughter Tyale to school and then returned home to work. A few hours later, he received a call from the school informing him that Tyale hadn't attended class. This wasn't the first time she had run away. She had a difficult childhood and was used to avoiding her problems in this way. However, this time they could not find her. Unlike previous instances where she usually returned on her own or was found. Then, Rick made a post on social media explaining the situation and asking anyone who knew Tyale's whereabouts to contact him. But no one responded. The Thorburn family knew Tyale was excited about Halloween and had already prepared a costume, so it was unusual when she disappeared just before the holiday. Concerned, they contacted the police, and the teenager was reported missing. However, no one tried to find the little girl, because it was assumed that she would return on her own. Less than a week later, on the morning of November 5, 2015, a local fisherman made a distressing call to the police. He had discovered a body in the reeds in the shallow waters of the Pimpama River, about 30 kilometers south of where the girl was last seen. By this time, the body was badly decomposed, likely due to local wildlife and the typical climate of the area. The police officers at the scene were unable to determine the sex or identity of the body, but they believed it was a teenager. The body was severely damaged, wearing only underwear, and was sent for autopsy. Following forensic examination and comparison with missing persons in the area, the police suspected it was 12-year-old Tyale, who had gone missing a week prior. This was later confirmed through DNA analysis. Experts concluded that the initial suspected animal bites were actually inflicted by a person, shows that Tyale suffered brutal abuse. The case was reclassified as murder and an investigation began. As Rick was the last person to see her alive, so law enforcement focused on investigating him. His behavior and inconsistent testimony raised suspicions, but required thorough investigation and evidence to prove. Investigators decided to interview the rest of the Thorburn family to see if they had any more information. However, after questioning the family members, they were unable to gather any useful information. Everyone corroborated Rick's account that he had dropped Tyale off at school, but no one had seen her since. The investigators then visited the school to verify Thorburn family's story, and there, they were able to collect more valuable information. After interviewing over 100 people, including all the students in Tyalea's class and her teachers, it became clear that no one had seen her that day. She was not seen in class or anywhere near the school. A review of the school's surveillance footage from that day revealed that she did not come to school and was not seen at the entrance, which was unexpected. This raised the question, where had she gone? However, some students, including Tyalea's friends, came forward to report that she was dealing with major problems. One of her friends even told the family that Tyale had pleaded to be taken out of the Thorburn family home because she felt mistreated and was worried about getting into grave danger. Sadly, Tyalea's life ended in a horrific manner. After speaking with other students, the police determined that Tyale had no enemies and there was no one else who could have harmed her. As a result, suspicions about the Foster family, the Thorburns, grew. However, when questioned, the family members strongly denied any allegations of domestic violence, they claiming that Tyale is a person who is very fond of making up stories and in the past she often ran away from foster families. The police then checked this information and found evidence that Tyale usually run away from home. This led them to believe that she was a troubled teenager prone to fabricating stories. All those close to the Thorburn family, including neighbors, confirmed that they were an exemplary family who ran a private kindergarten where many people sent their children. And no one believed that such kind people could do something terrible to their adopted daughter. As a result, the police began searching for other clues to Tyalea's murder, they believing that she may have fabricated a story about being mistreated, just as she had done before. Then the girl ran away and unfortunately became a victim of an attack. As a result, the police had no reason to suspect the Thorburns and instead, they focused their investigation on finding another motive for the murder. The Thorburn family continued to operate their kindergarten at home while the investigation was ongoing. Detectives have questioned about 300 sex offenders in the area. They hope to find clues to Tyalea's murder. However, even this extensive inquiry failed to yield any clues. Most of they had alibis, and some no longer lived in the area, making it impossible to identify suspects from this list. On December 4, 2015, a vital piece of evidence was found near the site where the body was discovered. Tyalea's shoes and backpack, which she used for school, were recovered about 100 meters away. This case drew widespread public attention. The story was extensively covered on various Australian TV channels, so gradually the whole country knew about this case. Several rallies were held before the funeral, with people demanding justice for the girl's tragic and undeserved death. Tyalea's biological mother organized the rallies and publicly sought answers from the police about her daughter's death. She also appeared on television to raise awareness and express her outrage over the failure of Child Protective Services to safeguard her daughter. The public's response was overwhelming, with over 600 people attending the girl's funeral on November 14, despite many not knowing her personally. Mourners wore white and purple t-shirts with hearts and Tyalea's name, as purple was her favorite color. The coffin was adorned with about 400 white roses, and purple balloons were released into the sky as the hearse departed for a private cremation. It's been 5 months since Tyalea's murder, but police still have no new leads. A substantial reward of 250,000 Australian dollars, equivalent to approximately 160,000 US dollars, was offered for any information that could aid in the case. Tyalea's mother made a heartfelt appeal on television, pleading for eyewitnesses to come forward and for those responsible to confess. The police also guaranteed immunity from prosecution for any accomplice who did not directly commit the crime and was the first to provide information. Despite these efforts, no new leads were uncovered. Police received a number of calls from a number of individuals, but none provided any valuable information. As the summer of 2016 arrived, the police have yet to find the main suspect. Detectives interviewed numerous individuals with a history of sexual violence, but the advanced decomposition of Tyalea's body at the time of discovery had destroyed any forensic evidence, leaving investigators uncertain about the cause of death. The only lead in the case was a hyoid bone fracture, suggesting that Tyalea was strangled. Initially, police suspected that the abduction occurred near the school, where the girl was dropped off by her parents in an area not covered by CCTV cameras. This theory was based on the lack of surveillance footage. A reward of $250,000 was offered for information leading to the capture of the perpetrator, but it remained unclaimed. A breakthrough came in May 2016, when the State Police Department received an anonymous tip after 6 months of investigation. The caller claimed to have information about the girl, Tyalea, and her foster family, Thorburn family. According to the anonymous witness, Thorburn family had been seeking a child with behavioral issues to care for, which would entitle them to increased benefits. The family's interest in Tyalea was allegedly purely financial, and they don't have any other feelings for little girl. The informant also suggested that all members of the Thorburn family might have been involved in Tyalea's disappearance. Unfortunately, the caller ended the conversation without providing further details, and their identity remains unknown. In connection with the phone call, the police revisited the possibility that Thorburn family was involved in the murder. Initially, they received reports from Tyalea's classmates of domestic violence at the Thorburn home, but these claims were unverified. However, after the anonymous call, detectives decided to re-question Thorburn family some of Tyalea's classmates. One of Tyalea's friends revealed that she had a romantic relationship with 19-year-old Trent, the youngest son of Thorburn family. Due to her age, Taylor didn't fully understand the situation and believed they were in a genuine relationship, as Trent had led her to believe. She developed feelings for him and enjoyed the horses on the farm, but she was also intimidated by Trent and the rest of the family, so she wanted to run away from them. It is likely that Tyalea suffered not only sexual violence but also physical abuse within the Thorburn household. Although Tyalea's friend's testimony needs further investigation, repeated questioning of the Thorburn family members yielded no results. They continued to deny all allegations, particularly those related to the abuse of a minor. Nevertheless, due to the serious suspicions surrounding the family, the authorities revoked their permission to operate a kindergarten and suspended their foster care license. Law enforcement officers installed listening devices in the Thorburn family's home. They uncovering shocking information that tarnished the family's decent image. The family members were extremely supportive of each other. Through the listening devices, it was discovered that on October 29, 2015, the family held a meeting, just a day before Tyalea went missing. During this meeting, Trent informed his parents that Tyalea had been having unusual stomach pains. This makes them worried and suspicious about Tyalea, a 12-year-old girl, having an unwanted pregnancy. The Thorburn family had become aware of the intimate relationship between Trent and Tyalea shortly before her disappearance. It was revealed that he had been having intercourse with the girl when no one was home. The wiretapping also exposed that Trent had repeatedly had intercourse with she over a period of about 10 months, nearly the entire time the girl was in their care. When they suspected Tyalea was pregnant, Trent turned to his parents, worried that their relationship would be exposed. However, Rick reassured his son that he would handle the problem. Judging by the conversations among the Thorburn family members, Tyalea was terrified of her father, Rick. Her fear was not unfounded, as the rest of the family also seemed to fear Rick's. Despite appearing to be a decent family man, but he was hiding a cruel and sinister personality. One evening, after a family discussion, Rick forced all the family members, except Tyler, to leave the house. When they returned a couple of hours later, Tyler was missing. Rick claimed she had run away and that the problems with her were now solved. However, his confidence that she would keep quiet made the rest of his family suspicious, that he might have harmed or even killed her. When Trent tried to check her room, Rick forbade it and made a threatening gesture. The family was too intimidated to contradict Rick, and they eventually dropped the matter. It later became clear that Rick's story about dropping off Tyler at school was false. In reality, she was likely no longer alive by that time. However, what exactly happened to her remained a mystery. Detectives monitoring the family's conversations overheard Rick instructing others on what to say and do to avoid arousing police suspicion, and they obediently followed his instructions. Initially, police called Julian and their children, Trent and Joshua, in for questioning, believing they would be the easiest to get information from. As the police disclosed the information they had, family members began to give testimony. The detectives gradually pieced together what had happened at their house. Rick had set everything up as though he was protecting his family. However, after thoroughly reviewing footage from the school's external CCTV cameras, the police realized that Rick had carefully attempted to conceal his crime and mislead the detectives. For example, he had indeed driven towards the school, as his car appeared on several CCTV cameras. However, none of the footage showed Tyler getting out of the car. Afterwards, a storm of criticism and suspicion fell on the Thorburn family. Julian and Joshua charged with giving false testimony and trying to mislead the investigation. Trent, involved in violence, faced charges of first-degree murder and was similarly accused of attempting to confuse the investigation. Detectives believed he killed Tyler and tampered with her body to hinder forensic identification. This initially made determining her gender difficult. Fortunately, DNA testing made identification possible, revealing Trent likely hadn't considered this method existed. Law enforcement officers had strong reasons to suspect that Rick was involved in severe physical and sexual abuse of Tyler. A total of 9 charges were filed against him. Trent faced charges of incest and giving false testimony. The family car, sold soon after Tyler's disappearance, was seized and inspected. Blood stains were found, which worsened Rick's health. He fainted when detained, and his condition became so severe in custody that doctors had to place him in an artificial coma. After a few days in the hospital, Rick regained consciousness. Doctors believed he might have intentionally caused his condition by taking medication. However, Rick could not evade responsibility for his crimes, and the Thorburn family was brought to court one after another. During the trial, Julian and Joshua admitted their guilt for all charges and agreed to testify against Trent and Rick. The jury quickly concluded that the entire Thorburn family was guilty of monstrous acts, though each member was guilty on different counts. Joshua was sentenced to 3 months in prison. His mother, Julian, received a sentence of 1.5 years. Trent, who pleaded guilty to perjury, incest, and attempted obstruction of justice, was sentenced to 4 years. All of them, including Trent, who raped Tyler, are now free. Trent was released on January 19, 2018, after serving only 16 months. The most brutal figure in this case, Rick, confessed during the trial to Tyler's murder, hiding her body to protect his son and family's reputation. He received a life sentence in May 2018, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Tracy Roberts. In 1998, the Tracy Roberts family relocated from Chicago to the small town of Early, Iowa. The couple, Tracy and Michael, were in their second marriages and each had a son from previous relationships. Tracy was American, while Michael was originally from Australia. They were seen as a respectable young family by the local community. Michael was a computer expert who ran an IT business from home, with many innovative ideas he aimed to pursue. Tracy is an active and sociable housewife who enjoys sports. The couple met online and got married just 18 days after meeting in person. They have since had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and appear to be a very happy family. Many people admired Michael's determination, including his neighbor Mona, a real estate broker with whom they had completed several successful transactions. Mona was eager to continue working with Michael. She said that her 20-year-old son, Dustin, was very private and had a hard time keeping a job. He had tried many different positions but had not been able to hold any for long. Michael suggested that help Dustin discover his strengths. Later, he began teaching Dustin the basics of business. He took him on trips and supported him in attending church. Michael was generally seen as kind, pleasant, and empathetic, while his wife was regarded as sweet and sociable. They raised 3 children together, with Tracy managing the household and children while Michael focused on work, often traveling for business. However, an unexpected situation happened to Tracy's family. On the evening of December 13, 2001, in the town of Early, Tracy was in the kitchen preparing dinner with her children. While the food was being heated, she was also bathing her 1-year-old daughter upstairs. Meanwhile, her 2 older boys, ages 3 and 11, were watching television in the older boy's bedroom. Suddenly, the boys were startled by a piercing scream from their mother. The eldest, Bert, rushed to see what was happening. He saw Tracy trying to enter the room, but someone grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back into the hallway. Holding her baby daughter, Tracy managed to hand her over to Bert before a struggle with the attacker ensued. Tracy slammed the door shut behind her, and the boys could hear the sounds of a struggle and their mother's muffled cries for help. Terrified and unsure of what to do, Bert listened as the noises escalated. Then, after a brief silence, a shot rang out. During the attack, Tracy managed to defend herself against the criminals. One was killed, and the other escaped. Bert called 911 around 7 p.m., reporting that strangers had broken into their home and attacked his mother. Police officers took the call seriously and rushed to the address. It was unclear what had happened to Tracy and her 3 children at that time. Paramedics then arrived to find the children sobbing and Tracy repeatedly shouting that an intruder was still upstairs and pointing towards the stairs. However, as per protocol, paramedics could not enter the house until police had confirmed that the house was secure. The police arrived and went up to the 2nd floor where they found a young man lying dead in a pool of blood. There was no one else in the room. Tracy was quickly placed in an ambulance by a doctor and taken to the nearest medical center. The scene revealed a shocking crime. The entire family was overwhelmed and confused by the situation. The police began an investigation to shed light on this complicated situation. The small town where the incident occurred was a quiet and peaceful community of about 500 residents, all of whom knew each other well. The police began their investigation by questioning Bert, the eldest son. Bert had witnessed an attack on his mother. The attacker had pulled her hair back. Stunned, the boy knew he had to act to protect himself and the other children, so he grabbed a baseball bat, ready to fight off anyone who entered his room. When the chaos died down, he could only hear his mother breathing heavily. Finally, he heard the voices of 2 men outside starting to bang on the door. In fear, the boy began to scream, trying to scare the intruders away. Outside, the men shouted about having guns, and then several shots were fired. Suddenly, his mother opened the door. Bert was relieved that it was finally over. He then called 911. After hearing about the incident, Mona rushed to the scene. She was looking for her 20-year-old son, Dustin, a family friend. His car was parked in a private driveway, but when she arrived, the entire area, including Dustin's car, was cordoned off. She was not allowed into Tracy's house. Mona asked the officers about her son's condition, but they told her that he was dead. Dustin was found lying in a pool of blood near a second-floor bedroom. Tracy had shot him during a struggle. The police did not share any further information with Mona. Tracy woke up in a hospital 20 kilometers from her home. She had injuries to her neck that suggested she had been strangled. Tracy told the police what had happened that night. While she was bathing her daughter on the second floor, she heard noises downstairs. Thinking that her husband had returned early from a business trip, she went down to check. But she discovered two men. When they started to go upstairs, Tracy quickly took her daughter to Bert's room and left the three children in the room. She then tried to enter the room and close the door, but one of the men grabbed her hair and dragged her into the hallway. Then one of the attackers used her jeans to strangle her. During the struggle, Tracy lost consciousness and the attackers lost focus. When she regained consciousness, she heard screaming outside the door. Realizing this was her chance to escape, she got up and ran to the gun safe next to the bed in the master bedroom. Although the attackers chased her, she managed to turn a few numbers and retrieve a gun. Tracy aimed at them and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened because the safety was still on. The attackers were caught off guard, allowing her to fire again after removing the safety. The loud bang stunned her, and she continued to fire at the attackers until the room filled with smoke. Tracy didn't see the criminals, but she heard someone running away from the house. One of the criminals fell, while the other managed to escape. She also heard her frightened children calling her name, so she rushed into the room and opened the door. In a moment of panic, her son swung a bat at her, trying to protect himself, and she narrowly avoided being hit. The most important thing was that the children were safe. As the smoke cleared in the main bedroom, Tracy saw Dustin, a 20-year-old, lying on the floor but still alive. He began to get up, and in her shock, she grabbed the gun and ordered him to stay down, desperate for everything to stop. She yelled at him not to move, but Dustin, who was the son of her friend Mona, didn't listen. He stood up and approached her. Worried for her and the children's safety, she fired several shots, and Dustin fell to his death. Tracy recounted that earlier that day, Dustin visited their home. When he discovered that her husband was away on a business trip, he lingered on the porch for a long time, seemingly unwilling to leave. His behavior was unusual, and Tracy ultimately had to shut the door in his face. The Tracy described a second participant in the crime as tall, with dark hair, around 30 years old, but she never saw his face. That evening, Tracy's husband, Michael, was on a business trip in Minneapolis. It was unclear why Dustin, whom Michael was helping, would attack Tracy and their children. The second killer was still at large, raising fears that he might return for revenge. This left Tracy feeling fearful, she unable to sleep because she was worried about her family's safety. The police had a hard time identifying the second suspect, based only on the vague description provided by Tracy. They began investigating Dustin's social connections to determine who might have accompanied him to Tracy's family home. Many people consider Tracy a hero. She gave many interviews to journalists. In front of the cameras, she and her husband, Michael, held hands, and she calmly said that she did what she had to do to protect her family, and the whole hall applauded. Many people thought that her actions were justified. Tracy was brave, she could protect not only herself but also her children. The police were wary of accepting anyone's testimony without evidence, so they began a thorough investigation of the events surrounding the case, finding the story unconvincing. Mona was going through the most difficult time of her life and was heartbroken. To her, the circumstances of her son's murder, as Tracy described them, were meaningless. She was haunted by nightmares of the attack that took her son's life. Mona, the mother of the young man who was shot, spoke to the media about her shock over the incident. She described Dustin as a kind person who had never shown aggression and had no criminal history. There was no reason for him to attack the Tracy family. However, Dustin had to see a psychologist with his mother. He had difficulty making friends at school, was often bullied, and was excluded from parties and celebrations. Despite seeing many doctors, they gave him different diagnoses without clear answers. Could his social difficulties lead to a moment of loss of control? Tracy told the police that she had always feared Dustin. She felt extremely unsafe, even around her husband, and she tried to avoid any encounters with Dustin. Under no circumstances would she let him be alone with the children because she believed he would harm them. Mona was shocked by these allegations. She had no idea that Tracy was facing such serious issues with her son. To Mona, everything seemed just the opposite. The police examined the crime scene and concluded that there was no clear motive for the violent attack. They suggested that it could only make sense if it had been planned as a robbery. The Tracy house contained many valuables, leading Tracy to believe that the young criminals aimed to steal cash or one of Michael's collectible weapons. However, the criminals' behavior did not resemble that of typical robbers. They ignored money and jewelry that were easily visible, and instead of trying to steal from Tracy while she was unconscious after being strangled, they focused solely on inflicting violence without any intent to sexually assault her. The police quickly identified a possible motive linked to Tracy and her husband. Not long before the home invasion, Tracy had experienced a traumatic incident. She was sexually assaulted by a dentist while under anesthesia. She regained consciousness during the assault, and the dentist attempted to silence her by promising to help her with her sexual problems and offering her $150,000 in compensation if she remained quiet. Tracy confided in her husband about this, and he urged her to report it to the police. Just 2 days after the dentist's attack on her, she was preparing to testify in court against her dentist, whom she was accusing of rape. He was likely the second person to invade her home, intending to silence her so she could not testify against him. However, police determined that the dentist had no connection to Dustin and had a solid alibi. He was at work at the time. Later, the Tracy recalled another individual who might have wanted her dead. His name was John Pittman, Tracy's first husband. They met while studying medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. John was a fourth-year student interning at Chicago Clinical Hospital, and 19-year-old Tracy was in her first year of radiology. John was very controlling and aggressive, but Tracy was accustomed to such behavior after growing up with a domineering father, so she considered it normal. She married him, and they eventually moved to Denver, Colorado, where she gave birth to a son. As John tried to control every aspect of her life, she thought it was normal. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tracy describes how he often abused her, especially during sex. Eventually, she grew tired of the physical violence, and they divorced. After the divorce, a custody battle began to take place. Bert revealed to his mother that his father had harassed him, leading to a contentious custody battle in court. Although there was no concrete evidence of harassment, Tracy was able to convince those present at the trial. Bert then lived with his mother. However, the long-running custody battle, which was still ongoing when the attack occurred, left John Pittman as a suspect. Even young Bert believed his father may have been involved in the attack. The police contacted John's colleagues in Virginia, where he lived, to confirm whether he had an alibi during the time of the crime. They found that he had a solid alibi. He was working at a clinic when the crime occurred. John denied any involvement and there was no evidence against him. At that time, he was a successful plastic surgeon with an excellent reputation. His acquaintances found it hard to believe that John could harm his son or kill his ex-wife, whom he had not been involved with for a long time. However, John had not been cleared yet and remained a suspect. Months passed without any progress in the case, and Tracy grew increasingly anxious. She felt unsafe knowing that the second attacker was still at large, fearing that he might return to take revenge on her. Meanwhile, the police began investigating the new suspect, Tracy's second husband, Michael. Further investigation revealed that their marriage had long since deteriorated, and the emotional connection between them had faded. Some speculated that Michael may have wanted to get rid of Tracy, a theory that received considerable support from those around them. Bert, Tracy's eldest son, revealed a disturbing truth about his stepfather. The man was very strict and often punished Bert severely for even minor infractions. Meanwhile, Tracy did not address her husband's aggressive behavior or protect her children. It is possible that Tracy had become accustomed to this type of treatment from a young age and did not realize it was a problem. Michael's behavior was noted by the police during a hospital visit where he visited his surviving relatives. His reaction seemed to be genuine shock at finding them still alive, suggesting that this outcome was not what he had wanted. Michael had a strong alibi. He was in another city on business. This was confirmed by CCTV footage. He was later given a lie detector test, but failed it and appeared to be hiding something. The police suspected he may have been involved in planning the attack. He did not inform his wife about the failed lie detector test. Tracy eventually discovered the truth about the lie detector test. Tracy became increasingly paranoid, believing that both her husband and his friend were conspiring against her to gain sole custody of their child. She shared her suspicions with the police chief, citing a dream in which Michael mentioned the plot. Tracy believed that her husband was indeed involved in the case. The police began investigating Michael and discovered that his IT business was struggling and he was in large debt. However, the couple held multi-million-dollar life insurance policies, which may have motivated Michael to eliminate Tracy to solve his financial problems. Additionally, he had a close relationship with Dustin, which may have led him to convince the young man to help him. Despite these theories, there was no concrete evidence linking Michael to any wrongdoing. Tracy and Michael's relationship became increasingly strained. In 2004, 3 years after the attack, they divorced. At the time, police had not found enough evidence to arrest Michael. After the divorce, Tracy and her children moved away. She changed her home, her job, and even her name to escape and protect herself from potential threats. Meanwhile, her friend Mona also moved to another city with her daughters. The tragedy not only affected Dustin's life, but also led to the death of his father a year later. On Thanksgiving Day 2002, Dustin's father chose to end his life at Dustin's grave. The father was devastated by his son's death, especially because of the judgmental looks from others who viewed Dustin as a dangerous criminal. Meanwhile, Mona, devastated by a series of losses, could not stop questioning what really happened the day her son arrived at Tracy's house. Mona refused to believe that he intended to hurt the people he admired. Michael's family was important to Dustin. He struggled with social interactions and felt safe and grateful to be with Michael, who understood him. The Mona intended to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Tracy Roberts to hold her accountable for Dustin's death and to uncover what happened that night. Mona lawyers launched their own investigation and discovered inconsistencies in Tracy's repeated accounts of the event. In one version, she claimed to have recognized Dustin immediately, while in another, she said she only learned his identity later. Additionally, she described shooting from different positions in her various retellings. Due to these discrepancies and the confusion surrounding the details, the lawyers concluded that her story was fabricated. On the day of the murder, Mona was busy shopping for Christmas. She called home to check if Dustin was up yet, as he had an important meeting scheduled. Her daughter answered and said that Dustin had left. She was relieved that Dustin was awake and going about his business. Later, Mona's nephew called to inform her that something had happened at Tracy's house. Mona rushed over, suspecting that Tracy and Michael had hurt each other, but she could not fathom that her son had been murdered. Mona mentioned that the day before the murder, Tracy had invited her son to her house to ask for help with something. Mona believed that this was Tracy's way of luring Dustin into a trap. She believed that Tracy was hiding something. However, no one paid attention to Mona's testimony until 7 years after the Roberts burglary. The same investigative team revisited the case and began to suspect that Tracy might not be the hero protecting her son, but a potential killer. There was no sign of forced entry or attempted robbery in the house. How could two people have broken in without leaving any evidence? Dustin had 9 gunshot wounds, indicating he had been shot at close range with no chance of survival, and there was no evidence of a second attack. The police decided to speak with Tracy's first husband, John. He described her as a monster, revealing that she had had bouts of aggression, including one time when she pointed a gun at him while threatening violence. She eventually fired a shot into the ceiling, prompting him to call the police. John discovered that Tracy was both aggressive and unfaithful. She drained their bank accounts. He even hired a private detective because he suspected she was cheating, and the detective confirmed that several of Tracy's lovers left their home while John was at work. Eventually, John filed for divorce because he began to fear Tracy. Concerned about their son growing up in such a toxic environment with an unstable mother, he fought for custody. This enraged Tracy, who tried to turn their son against John. A dentist was accused of raping Tracy during a dental appointment, but he claimed that she had been harassing him for a long time and was willing to prove it. His practice was equipped with cameras and the recordings supported his claim. It was revealed that Tracy, upon learning of this, had withdrawn her complaint against the dentist the day before the incident. Tracy's second husband, Michael, who she accused of being abusive and harassing her, denied all her allegations to police. He said Tracy was unfaithful. Michael claimed that he put up with these problems for the sake of his children but eventually decided to divorce her. He described himself as a strict father who never abused his wife and children and claimed that Tracy turned the children against him after their divorce. After the divorce, Michael moved to California to focus on his business. The Tracy seemed to slander everyone around her, presenting herself as a victim of abuse from the men in her life. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Police believed that her account of the events from December 13, 2001, was just another lie fabricated by Tracy. The police wanted to meet with Burt to gather more information, but Tracy not only moved to another state and changed her personal information, she also frequently changed her contact information. The police had to thoroughly review the entire list of evidence again. One significant item was an old computer discovered in the back seat of Dustin's car. Tracy believed this computer was crucial evidence in the robbery because it belonged to her husband. However, it was puzzling why Dustin would steal it when there were more valuable and easier to take items available in the house. Additionally, a pink notebook was found in which Dustin had written plans for the murder shortly before his death. The notes indicated that his mission included killing Tracy Roberts, and surprisingly, the person who ordered the assassination was Tracy's first husband, John. However, there was a strange detail in these notes. They contained so many specific details about events that Dustin could not have known before the attack, yet they were written in his own handwriting. It seemed that Dustin had written them under duress, possibly under threat. Dustin's mother did not recognize the pink notebook, which seemed more suited for a woman. Dustin disliked this color and would never have purchased such a notebook. He never kept diaries, and the only content in this notebook was a crime plan, which appeared unusual. It looked brand new and seemed to have been used only once for those notes. It suggested that Tracy might have given the notebook to someone to stage a crime. The latest investigation revealed that Dustin was not the attacker but Tracy's victim. It was also revealed that Tracy had been facing problems in her new town in Nebraska, where she had recently moved. She was charged with falsifying documents and false identity. 10 years after the murder, the police discovered the truth. On July 27, 2011, the police arrested Tracy. The memories of a friend who had helped Tracy clean out her house provided vital information. The friend knew about a notebook containing Dustin's confession. The police discovered that all of these statements had been recorded at Tracy's request. Police found no signs of an attack in the house. The wounds to her neck were self-inflicted, as evidenced by minor scratches that were not life-threatening. The claim that Dustin had struggled to stand up after being shot multiple times was clearly implausible. Forensic experts analyzed crime scene photographs and determined, based on blood spatter, that Dustin was still lying on the floor, with all the shots coming from above. This contradicted Tracy's version of events. The defense argued that Tracy was simply trying to protect her child. They said much of the evidence against her was circumstantial. The defense relied heavily on the testimony of Tracy's eldest son, Bert. He claimed that he heard men screaming and saw someone dragging his mother out the door. Bert also confirmed that the attacker told his mother that she was dead and warned that he would be next. He then saw a young man with a gunshot wound trying to get up, as his mother had described. However, the reliability of Bert's testimony has been questioned. Tracy initially mentioned that the nursery door was closed at the time, preventing Bert from witnessing the incident. The prosecution argued that Bert's account may have been influenced by his mother. The prosecution argued that Tracy killed Dustin to frame her husband, hoping to gain sole custody of their children and access to his money. This was considered the primary motive for the crime. That same day, Tracy confronted Dustin at gunpoint, forced him to write in a notebook, and then shot him. She then staged a scene to make it look like she had been attacked, inflicting minor injuries on herself and leaving a notebook and a computer in Dustin's car. A forensic expert later confirmed that her injuries were inconsistent with her being unconscious, further casting doubt on her testimony. After reviewing the evidence, the jury found Tracy Roberts guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tracy cried in court when she heard the verdict, but many people did not believe her tears, as they did not seem genuine. Again, she seemed to be acting. The situation was especially difficult for Bert, who was convinced that his mother had saved the lives of all her children that night and had been wrongly imprisoned. He continued to visit and support her. Years later, Tracy's second husband, Michael, with the approval of the guardianship agency, took the children back to Australia with his new wife. Tracy maintains her innocence and is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in Iowa. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Joel Shanbrum. Joel Shanbrum grew up in the town of Northridge, California. He met his future wife, Jennifer, while working as a DJ at a club. They quickly formed a close relationship and began dating. Many people are jealous because their relationship looks so perfect and their happiness radiates to everyone around them. Both sets of parents supported their relationship enthusiastically. Their delightful relationship eventually led to marriage. Jennifer and Joel married in 1991, and she moved to Los Angeles. Joel aspired to be a police officer, so he joined the police academy and, by 1993, was employed by the Los Angeles law enforcement agencies. Joel was dedicated to his job, especially overseeing troubled teenagers, and took pride in helping others. They later had a son named Jacob, and the family seemed to be living the perfect life. Although on the outside the family looked happy, but inside they hide dark secrets, which eventually lead to tragedy. On March 18, 1998, Jennifer's mother, Diane Bates, who lived with them, called 911. She returned home in the evening and found Joel lying motionless on the living room couch. He showed no signs of life and was bleeding. When the police arrived, she met them outside, she too afraid to go back inside. She suggested to the officers that Joel might have taken his own life. The police reassured her and entered the house. Upon examining the body in the scene, it became clear that it was a murder. Joel had been shot 3 times in the head, and there was no gun nearby. The medics confirmed Joel's death, and his body was sent for a forensic examination. The police quickly identified the murdered man as their colleague, 32 years old Joel Shanbrum. Joel is known to be a meek, calm person who dislikes conflict, so he seems to have no enemies. As they examined the rest of the house, they discovered that the entire upper floor had been ransacked, with drawers pulled out and clothes scattered everywhere. This suggested a robbery, leading investigators to suspect that Joel was killed during a botched burglary. While inspecting the house, the police heard a noise coming from the second-floor bathroom. They attempted to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. The officers asked for the door to be opened. From behind the door, they heard a frightened woman's voice, saying she didn't believe they were really the police. An officer then slid his badge under the door, and it was unlocked. Inside, they found 28-year-old Jennifer, the wife of Joel, and Jacob, their 3-year-old son. Both were visibly shaking with fear. The detectives took Jennifer aside for questioning. According to Jennifer, at around 7 p.m., she went to the bathroom to bathe Jacob. Then, she heard some noise downstairs, but she thought her husband was doing something. Then, as they stepped outside, they heard gunshots. Scared, she and Jacob ran back into the bathroom, closed the door, and hid to avoid being noticed. She also heard intruders moving through the house, throwing things around and talking about their loot. She realized they were thieves who had broken into the house, and her husband had accidentally encountered them, so they decided to eliminate him. She and Jacob remained hidden in the bathroom for over 2 hours until the police arrived. She was grateful that the robbers did not find them and that they were unharmed. When she asked the police about her husband, they informed her he had died. Jennifer, Jacob, and Diana were taken to the police station to provide detailed testimonies. Jennifer repeated her account, which sounded plausible and convincing. Jacob was too young to be questioned. Investigators believed the story that Joel was killed by robbers. Diana explained that when she saw Joel bleeding on the couch, she panicked and ran out of the house, driven by shock and fear. In her fright, she did not think to check on Jennifer and Jacob but just wait for the police outside. After their statements, the police allowed Jennifer, Diane, and Jacob to return home while they began investigating the robbery. At that time in the area, there had been several robberies, which supported Jennifer's story about the robbers. However, there were some inconsistencies. Previously, the robbers hadn't killed anyone. They followed a clear pattern, breaking into only empty houses late at night, which allowed them to remain unnoticed and difficult to get caught. It was odd that the robbers suddenly changed their tactics and broke into a house where many people lived, especially when everyone was home and the lights were on. Why would they attempt such a bold robbery? The Shanbrum family was considered middle class and not wealthy enough to attract the attention of thieves. Furthermore, after inspection, it was found that jewelry, money, electronics, and other valuables were not missing, even those in plain sight. There were no signs of forced entry or any evidence of strangers. No outsiders' fingerprints or DNA were found in the house. The neighbors also didn't notice anything unusual. They heard gunshots and looked out the windows but didn't see anyone leaving the house. Everything looked so strange. The next day, Jennifer was called to the police station for questioning again. She appeared very upset and repeated the same story, but this time added that she heard her husband, Joel, trying to fight back. He told the intruders that he was a police officer and they made a big mistake breaking into his house. Jennifer also mentioned that after she and Jacob ran into the bathroom, she heard 2 more shots. The detectives also interviewed Diane. They asked her to recount in detail what she had done on the day of the murder. She said she was off work that day. She left home at noon to go to the cinema, then went shopping, and had dinner at a cafe. Meanwhile, Joel, Jennifer, and Jacob were at home all evening. Then, she returned home and found Joel murdered on the couch. She noted an unusual detail: the living room blinds were closed, which was not typical for their family, because they often opened the curtains even at night. She believed the robbers had closed the blinds. The detectives found nothing suspicious in Diane's account and sent her home, they continuing their investigation. However, the police sensed something was amiss. On March 20th, the autopsy report for Joel was released. It revealed that all 3 shots were fired at close range. The first shot resulted in a superficial wound to the back of the head, the second hit him in the cheek, and the third struck him in the eye, penetrating the skull, caused death. A brain examination showed that Joel was shot with 2 types of weapons, 2 shots from a pistol and 1 from a .410 caliber weapon, which is rare. This could be a crucial clue in the investigation. Joel's time of death was determined to be between 8 and 9 o'clock in the evening, contradicting Jennifer's claim that he was shot at 7 p.m. Additionally, the medical examiner discovered that Joel was shot while asleep. During the crime scene examination, forensic experts concluded that there was little blood spatter around the body. If Joel had resisted and been shot while moving, there would have been more blood spatter. This finding contradicted Jennifer's testimony, where she claimed that she heard Joel say he was a police officer while arguing with the assailants. This was clearly a lie, causing detectives to investigate more thoroughly the Shambrum family's relationship. Investigators spoke to people close to the family and discovers that Joel and Jennifer's relationship is not as perfect as it appears. There has been a serious conflict between them for a long time. They frequently quarreled, mainly over financial issues, and some believed that they were heading towards divorce. Joel's sister mentioned that Joel, besides working as a police officer, held 2 additional jobs to support his family. He wants his wife and children to have a prosperous life. The family rented the house they are living in after their previous home was foreclosed on by the bank. Jennifer, Joel's wife, did not work outside the home. She was a housewife, taking care of their child and managing household chores. Even though Joel tried hard, but they still had financial difficulties, and Jennifer's desires for a nicer house and a more expensive car added pressure. Joel loves Jennifer very much and was willing to do anything for her. He worked 3 jobs at once to meet her needs, but he couldn't manage a 4th job. The financial strain led to arguments. Joel, in hopes of saving their marriage, suggested they try marriage counseling, but Jennifer refused. When Joel got a managerial position at an insurance company, Jennifer wanted to work there too. It was at this company that they met Matthew Fletcher, and they quickly became best friends. Over time, Joel began to suspect that Jennifer and Matthew were having an affair. Eventually, Jennifer left her job, she feeling exhausted, and returned to being a housewife, but she continued to stay in touch with Matthew. Joel suspected his wife of having an affair, which led him to consider divorce. Because of his son, he doesn't want to divorce, but by 1997, he was exhausted by their strained relationship. He confided in his sister about his decision to divorce his wife and was determined to pursue custody of his son. However, this was his last conversation with his sister. On March 23, 1998, Joel was buried. At the funeral, Jennifer and Matthew attended together and they appeared unemotional, which upset his relatives. Later, detectives discovered that she and Matthew had gone to a hotel after the funeral, taking champagne and celebrating there overnight. Detectives at the funeral, who noted she and Matthew's odd behavior, decided to follow them. The plainclothes police had been monitoring Jennifer for a long time and noticed her daily contact with Matthew. Sometimes they spent the night together, shows that they have a romantic relationship with each other. Meanwhile, Joel's relatives suspected Jennifer of being involved in her husband's murder. A week after Joel's death, Matthew was summoned for questioning at the police station. Jennifer and Matthew arrived together but denied having an affair, despite their pager messages indicating otherwise, as they exchanged numerous love messages. They were interrogated separately. Matthew was asked about his whereabouts at the time of the murder. He claimed that at 7 p.m., he visited a client's home in the San Fernando Valley to handle an insurance policy and then went to see his sister at the hospital where she worked. The police began verifying his alibi. Some parts were confirmed, but they couldn't determine where Matthew was between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. Despite suspicions, there was no concrete evidence against Jennifer and Matthew, so they were released. Detectives continued to gather information about them. On April 27, researchers discovered that Joel had 3 life insurance policies totaling more than $1 million. The first was for $300,000 and he had obtained it while working as a police officer. The second was for $500,000, contract was paused and then reinstated shortly before the tragedy. There was also a $314,000 policy that Joel didn't even know about. He had been insured for one of his other jobs. After her death, Jennifer immediately went to the insurance companies to request the payments. The situation became more grim, as money, especially large amounts of money, is often a motive for crime. Under the second insurance policy worth $500,000, several issues emerged. Joel initially issued this policy himself but later decided he didn't need it and canceled it. 2 months before the tragedy, the policy was reopened with a signature at an office in Atlanta, Georgia. However, his sister was convinced that he didn't do this. She believed he had intentionally suspended the policy and questioned why he would reactivate it, especially given his busy schedule with 3 jobs, leaving him little time for lunch, let alone trips to another city. The detective discovered that Joel was not in Atlanta at that time, and the signature on the documents was fake. The investigation revealed that his wife Jennifer and her lover Matthew orchestrated this scheme. They traveled to Atlanta, went to the insurance company's head office, and forged Joel's signature on the policy. This suggested that their actions were premeditated. Although the evidence was circumstantial, but investigators continued to gather more information against they. Investigators interviewed witnesses, friends, relatives, co-workers of the Shanbrum family, and thoroughly examined the case materials to find evidence to incriminate Jennifer and Matthew. 6 months after Joel's death, Jennifer received $614,000 from 2 of his life insurance policies. Although the largest policy, worth $500,000, was initially denied due to a forged signature, but it didn't seem to make Jennifer and Matthew angry. Jennifer deposited the money into Matthew's account. They began dating officially in June 1998 and soon made their relationship public. She and Matthew took a romantic trip to Mexico, got engaged, and married on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1999, in Hawaii, just 4 days before the anniversary of Joel's death. Jennifer and Matthew lived extravagantly, spent insurance money on buying a car. Joel's family was completely taken surprised by Jennifer's sudden change. They were confused and didn't understand why she was acting like that. There was something wrong with her behavior. She continues to enjoy life to the fullest, remarried, and prepared for motherhood. Most importantly, they couldn't believe that she had gotten away with Joel's murder, from which she had profited. Despite the passage of time, but the police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge Jennifer and Matthew. After Jennifer and Matthew's child was born, they began living a very private life. They rarely appeared in public and interacted with only a few people. In 2002, detectives revisited the case. They believed Diane was dishonest in her testimony. Over the years, her testimony was inconsistent, with her story changing multiple times. There was also a gap in time between when she found Joel and when she called 911. This left investigators uncertain about what happened in the house during that time and what she was doing. Her behavior appeared suspicious to the investigators. The detectives called Diane in for questioning again. She continued to deny any involvement in the crime. Investigators offered her immunity from prosecution. They promised that if she testified truthfully before a grand jury, she would not be charged with any crime related to Joel's death. Despite this offer, she still disagrees. Diane eventually succumbed to police pressure and confessed that her daughter Jennifer had been in a romantic relationship with Matthew. They planned to kill Joel, and Diane was sent out for a walk that day to prevent her from interfering. She felt she had no choice but to comply. Diane also revealed that Jennifer had always dreamed of wealth, but Joel couldn't give her that. When Jennifer met Matthew, he enticed her with promises of riches, and she became influenced by his ideas. Diane found him to be a manipulator who controlled Jennifer and held him responsible for everything. Jennifer was highly skilled with firearms, she frequently practiced shooting, and owned a pistol. Matthew also had a shotgun. After Joel's murder, both the pistols and the shotgun vanished and was never found. Detectives believe Jennifer fired 2 shots at Joel with her pistol, while Matthew fired the final shot with the shotgun. Based on Diana's confession and the circumstantial evidence, the police obtained an arrest warrant for Jennifer. Matthew was also arrested, and both were charged with the first-degree murder of Joel. At the time, Jennifer was pregnant with Matthew's second child, and then she gave birth in prison while awaiting trial. Her sister took custody of her 3 children. The trial began in March 2004. Matthew, confident due to his legal education, chose to represent himself, while Jennifer had a lawyer. They were tried together. Throughout the trial, Matthew and Jennifer appeared unconcerned. They were often seen talking and laughing with each other, as if they were not paying attention to the seriousness of the proceedings. They confident that the lack of physical evidence would lead to their acquittal, and they will not be held responsible for Joel's death. It was also revealed during the trial that Matthew hadn't divorced his previous wife, adding another charge against him. The prosecution is facing difficulties due to the lack of physical evidence such as DNA, fingerprints, weapons, and there were no other witnesses but Diane. They argued that Matthew and Jennifer had killed Joel in cold blood, with money as their primary motive. According to the prosecution, on the night of the murder, while Joel slept on the couch in the living room, she and Matthew executed their plan. She supposedly fired the first 2 shots with a pistol, and Matthew delivered a final shot with a shotgun. This occurred while Jacob was upstairs taking a bath. Afterward, they staged a robbery on the 2nd floor, took the weapon, left the house, and disposed of it. Jennifer then locked herself and Jacob in the bathroom until the police arrived. Matthew and Jennifer denied their guilt during the trial, claiming they had an alibi. Jennifer said she was hiding in the bathroom with Jacob, while Matthew was at a business meeting and then visited his sister. However, their alibi was not strong and was considered controversial. Then, the prosecutor highlighting key points, the house door was closed with no signs of forced entry, and since Joel was asleep, the door had to have been opened by someone already inside. This implicated Jennifer and Matthew. Diane, as part of a deal for immunity, testified against Matthew. While reviewing crime scene photos, the prosecutor noticed a bottle of water in the shower stall with the light on. He pointed this out to the jury, suggesting Jennifer had prepared to wait in the bathroom, indicating premeditation. The jury deliberated for 6 days before concluding that Jennifer and Matthew were guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Both received life sentences without parole. During sentencing, Matthew and Jennifer supported each other by holding hands and never divorced. Matthew is incarcerated at the California State Penitentiary in Los Angeles, and Jennifer is at the Central California Women's Institution. Despite their imprisonment, they continue to communicate and exchange love letters. All of their appeals were rejected. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Bodhisattva Potter. This is a story about two lovers who met in school and wanted to spend all their free time together, believing their love would last forever. However, they were unaware of how brutally their happiness could be shattered by an unexpected tragedy. Bodhisattva Potter was born in 1991 in Newport Beach, California, to Rick Potter and Scherzer. Bodhisattva also has an older brother named Zen. At the time of Bodhisattva and Zen's birth, both parents were in their 30s, and soon after, the family experienced significant career growth. Scherzer is a psychologist who specializes in working with autistic children. Her husband is a psychotherapist and also provides medical consultation. From a young age, Bodhisattva was very intelligent and kind. She was humble and maintained good relationships with everyone around her. All her teachers recognized her intellectual talent. Bodhisattva was also passionate about sports, especially gymnastics and basketball, and she pursued these hobbies and won several awards for her achievements. She also played the piano and sang. Her parents divorced in 1998. At the time, Bodhisattva was 8 years old and living in Newport Beach with her mother and brother. They moved to Hollandale, California, a small desert town with a population of just 6,000, about 2 hours away from their old home. Hollandale is an isolated community with a strong sense of community, with 2 large lakes that make it feel like an oasis in the desert. The town has about 2,000 homes and a well-developed sports and recreation infrastructure, making it feel like a small resort. Bodhisattva was accepted into the Lewis Center, an academy whose curriculum prepares students for entry into top universities. At this time, Zen moved back in with his father, and Bodhisattva stayed with his mother. Despite the distance, the two brothers often spent weekends and holidays together. Initially, Bodhisattva and her mother rented a house. In 2004, when she was 12 years old, her mother bought a plot of land near a lake to build her dream home. Bodhisattva was actively involved in the design of the new house, but the construction process took longer than expected due to high costs, so they continued to live in the rented house during this time. On Bodhisattva's 13th birthday, she gradually became more mature. She began to seek independence. Her mother recognized this change and allowed her daughter more freedom. Over time, Bodhisattva became interested in Hollywood and dreamed of becoming a film producer. By 2007, she was in high school and began dating Christopher Cody Thompson, her first love. They were a perfect match, sharing many interests in film, psychology, and architecture, and they enjoyed exploring abandoned buildings together. Cody, born in 1989 in Victorville, California, is 2 years older than Bodhisattva. He has 2 older sisters, Sarah and Katie. Cody is a young man passionate about nature and cycling, and he enjoys restoring custom bikes with his father. At the time he met Bodhisattva, Cody had been working as a teaching assistant for 2 years. People generally describe him as friendly and outgoing. Scherzer was surprised to find out that her daughter had a boyfriend. She felt that it was too early for her daughter to start a relationship and was prepared to intervene if necessary. However, as a psychologist, she realized that she needed to accompany her daughter. She understood that her daughter was growing up and that this journey could not be controlled by restrictions alone. Initially, she considered Cody to be a bit rude, which made her feel uncomfortable. However, as they began to communicate, they found common ground. The Scherzer soon realized that her initial judgment about Cody was wrong. He turned out to be a good person. She felt more secure about her daughter's relationship. Cody graduated from high school and began working for the family business, which helped him become financially independent. He was able to support himself and even buy his own car. He has a passion for exploring old buildings, so he scheduled a visit to an old military bunker that had been repurposed and is now open to the public. Initially, the place attracted many adventure lovers. Over time, it became a popular place for teenage parties. However, the place was not safe. The bunker was often used by addicts to do drugs, and people also came here to practice shooting for themselves. Despite these risks, Cody still wanted to visit because of its uniqueness. Many of his friends knew about it but disapproved of his hobby. However, Cody was attracted to the place and liked the feeling of being in a secret location. In December 2007, after turning 18, Cody planned to take his 16-year-old girlfriend, Bodhi, to the bunker to show her the place they both loved for exploring abandoned sites. Excited by the idea, Bodhi invited her mother to join them. Her mother, Scherzer, objected to the idea. She was shocked by the plans the couple had made. Scherzer warned that the place could be dangerous and forbade Bodhisattva from going there. Although Bodhisattva understood her mother's concerns, her rebellious teenage spirit got the better of her. She did not fully understand the dangers of the place. Despite her mother's warnings, she was determined to explore the bunker. In January 2008, Scherzer was in Newport on business. While her mother was away, Bodhisattva had a few days free to do whatever she wanted. She decided to take the opportunity to visit the shelter. At the time, Cody had planned to take 30 people from the school to the abandoned shelter in the woods. To get to the abandoned building, she asked her friend Andrew to drive her there. He picked Bodhisattva up from home and drove her there on the evening of Friday, January 4, 2008. Bodhisattva hid her intentions from her mother and brother. She told her brother that she was going to see their mother, while she assured her mother that she would stay home with her brother. Bodhisattva was clever enough to make her story sound believable, and her family believed her. On the evening of January 4th, when she and Andrew arrived at the bunker, several cars were there, including those of Cody and his friends. Everyone was enjoying the music and having a good time. Their group was quite large, making them feel safe. The teens explored the empty bunker and had fun until about 4 a.m. When everyone started to leave, Cody and Bodhisattva decided to stay and sleep overnight in his car under the stars, taking advantage of the time when their mother was not there. Bodhisattva and Cody fell asleep until Cody received a call from one of his friends. The friend had lost his iPad, but Cody found it in a car and promised to return it at their next meeting. After the call, Cody went back to sleep and did not contact anyone again. Around 4:30 a.m., Scherzer woke up with a sharp pain in her chest, feeling as if she had been stabbed. She felt worried about her daughter, but decided to wait until 6:30 to call Bodhisattva. It was their family's habit to start the day with a short conversation to ask how everyone was doing. However, when Scherzer called, Bodhisattva did not answer. Scherzer tried to call her daughter, but the call was unsuccessful. She then contacted Zen and discovered Bodhisattva's lie. Zen thought her sister was with their mother, while the mother believed Bodhisattva was with Zen. They discovered that Bodhisattva had gone with Andrew, who had picked her up from home and had taken her somewhere, leaving her family worried and angry. Scherzer also tried to contact Andrew, but was unsuccessful. Scherzer, who was in another city at the time, decided to contact the police. At that time, Bodhisattva had not been reached for about 10 hours, but the police explained that it was not enough time to officially classify her as missing. The police initially thought that Bodhisattva had simply run away or gone out with friends. Meanwhile, her mother felt helpless because she was far away. Scherzer's worries grew when she called Cody's mother, who had also not seen her son since the night before and was extremely worried. They began contacting all of their son's friends and discovered that the two had attended a party at an abandoned bunker the night before, and no one had heard from them since. This was Bodhisattva's mother's worst nightmare, as she considered the location to be one of the dangerous. Zen and his friends quickly arrived at the location and found Cody's car parked outside an abandoned building. Both the driver's and passenger doors were wide open, which added to their worries as there was no one inside. Zen and his friends grabbed flashlights and entered the building. The search continued for several hours, with them splitting up and searching different areas of the bunker. Eventually, one of the friends discovered Cody in a room of the abandoned building. He showed no signs of life. The most alarming detail was that Cody was missing an eye. And Bodhisattva was still missing. Zen immediately called 911 to report the incident. Around 3 p.m. that day, Cody's mother received a call informing her that her son had been shot. Upon hearing this, Bodhisattva's mother was extremely panicked, although she still held on to a faint hope that her daughter was alive. She then quickly went to the shelter to look for her daughter. Meanwhile, the police were on their way to the scene, but the journey took a long time. When the police arrived, they searched the bunker area, and some police were outside to question those who had witnessed the incident. The bunker was complex and confusing, like a maze. Inside, it was so dark that even the light of a few lanterns could not help the police gather information. The teenagers who found Cody's body helped the police locate him. He had a serious gunshot wound to the head, which caused him to lose an eye and eventually die. Cody's body was removed from the bunker, but the search did not end there. Because it was so dark inside, the police had to wait for generators and lights to be installed inside the bunker. Later, near where Cody's body was found, police also discovered Bodhisattva's body in the hallway. She had suffered gunshot wounds to the chest and head. There were no signs of rape. The weapon used was determined to be a handgun. Both victims had multiple wounds to their bodies. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras inside the shelter. Police began questioning everyone who was at the party that night, hoping that someone might have seen something unusual. This information could be crucial in solving the case. None of the victims' belongings had been stolen, not even the iPad had been left in the car. There were no signs of sexual assault or struggle. Police were piecing together what might have happened on the night of the murder. After Cody's final phone call, the attackers forced the young couple out of the car and took them to a dark shelter, where they were shot one by one. It appears that Bodhisattva tried to escape but was caught at the end of the hallway and shot. The shocking murders of Bodhisattva and Cody caused widespread public outrage. Such a dangerous military site was easily accessible. It was not fenced, locked, or monitored. As a result, a debate arose over the demolition of the abandoned building. During the investigation, police learned that several years earlier, a young man had encountered a group of dangerous men in the area. The men were clean-shaven and acted aggressively, suggesting they were members of the same gang. However, the men were never seen again after that encounter. In their investigation, the police focused on a call made by a friend to Cody at 4:30 a.m., when Cody was still alive. Bodhisattva's mother then attempted to reach her daughter at 6:30 a.m. but was unable to make contact. This timeline indicates that the tragic events leading to the double murder occurred between these two calls, starting after 4:30 a.m. A large amount of evidence was collected at the crime scene. Forensic scientists had to analyze thousands of fingerprints and hundreds of spent cartridges, as well as a large amount of trash in the abandoned building, to determine what was related to the case. In addition, the victims' computers were confiscated for valuable information. Police believe that Cody and Bodhisattva may have had an argument with someone, leading to the attack. During questioning, some friends who attended the party recalled that 3 strangers entered the basement. These strangers, aged 17 to 18, arrived in a Honda Odyssey van around midnight and asked to join the party. They were allowed to stay and brought alcohol to share. Cody's group thought they were normal teenagers and didn't suspect anything unusual. However, none of Cody's friends could remember when the strangers left the party. On January 13th, the police received a crucial tip from Sean, an informant. He revealed that his friend, David Smith, had called him on the night of the murders, inviting Sean to a bunker for shooting practice. Sean declined the invitation. A few days later, David contacted him again, sounding very concerned. Sean asked David about recent events, and Sean received a vague answer that alluded to a serious crime. This led Sean to suspect that David might be involved in the double murder at the bunker, so he reported his concerns to the police. Police later interviewed a key witness, who identified David Smith as a 19-year-old from Limestone, about an hour and a half from Holy Dale. On the night of the murder, David and his friends Colin McLaughlin, 18, and Cameron Thompson, 16, had set out for a fun night out that turned deadly. They drove Cameron's mother's SUV into the desert, where they stumbled upon a bunker party. The teens gathered there became their targets, leading to the tragic events that unfolded. In 2007, David, a former high school track and field athlete, lost his athletic scholarship to the University of California, Riverside after a disagreement with the head coach. Unable to pay for college, he was expelled and moved in with his friend Cameron, who then introduced him to Colin. The three quickly became close friends, but their aggressive behavior scared the local residents. The three criminals were arrested on January 17th. But all three denied any involvement in the crime. During a police search of their home, the police found the murder weapon. In addition, blood was found on clothing and shoes, and tests confirmed that the blood belonged to Bodhisattva and Cody, who were murdered. Friends who were present at the bunker that night identified the attackers as strangers who had brought alcohol to the party. All of the teens came from troubled families. Colin's father was a police officer, which gave them access to the weapon used in the murder. Colin, considered the ringleader of the group, had struggled with mental health issues since he was 5 years old. By the age of 17, Colin had attended 7 different schools and had spent some time in an adult detention center. He had significant difficulties adapting socially, which were made worse by his use of alcohol and drugs. During the investigation, many witnesses reported his troubling behavior. Colin even confided in friends that he had thoughts of killing. When he was angry or had an argument with his parents, he would often threaten to kill them. As Colin entered his teens, many people began to fear him, especially when he started talking about mass murder online. During a search of Colin's belongings, police discovered evidence that he had a history of violence. Colin had repeatedly threatened to kill others, including writing detailed notes about shooting up classmates. While in school, he was evaluated by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he was put on medication. At age 16, Colin faced court charges for attempting to build an explosive device, a year before he killed Bodhisattva and Cody. He was placed in juvenile detention and, upon his release, was placed on probation for several months. Prior to the killings, he had stopped taking his bipolar medication. The suspects, Colin McLaughlin, Cameron Thompson, and David Smith, have not confessed to the crime. However, during pre-trial hearings, Colin was identified as the primary perpetrator of the murder and was released on $2 million bail. He faces a potential prison sentence of 111 years. In contrast, David Smith's bail was set at $1 million and he faces up to 81 years in prison for his involvement in the crime. In February 2009, the prosecutor's office announced its intention to pursue the death penalty against Colin, while David and Cameron were likely to receive life sentences. The defense argued that Colin, who suffers from bipolar disorder, should receive treatment instead of being detained or executed. As a result, a psychological evaluation was ordered. In 2010, two forensic psychiatrists evaluated Colin and determined that he was mentally sound and aware of his actions at the time of the crime, meaning he was sane and competent to stand trial. Bodhisattva's mother Scherzer believed that the killer should not be executed. She felt that the appropriate punishment would be imprisonment for all three criminals so that they could understand the severity of their actions. The case took a long time to resolve, lasting more than 4 years due to discussions about the evidence and the ages of the criminals. It was eventually decided to try the criminals as adults. In 2011, Cameron Thompson reached a deal with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and attempted robbery. He agreed to testify against his two friends. Cameron explained that the three of them had planned to rob a car in the desert, but when they arrived, they found no one there. Instead, they stumbled upon a party in a nearby bunker. Initially, they asked to join and gain the trust of the teenagers at the party. But there were too many people and they realized that this was not the right time to strike. They decided to wait until most of the teens had left before attacking anyone. The criminals hid in a truck, armed with guns, and were not detected by Cody. When the couple fell asleep in the truck, the criminals sprang into action. They forced the sleeping couple out of the truck at gunpoint and took them to a dark, secluded area of the bunker. There, they forced the couple to their knees, and Cody was shot execution style. Bodhisattva tried to escape but was caught and shot by Colin. They then returned to Cody and shot him again. Unfortunately for the criminals, the couple had no valuables, so the robbery was unsuccessful. They then left the bunker and went home. As part of the deal, Cameron was sentenced to life in prison. Although he had the right to apply for parole, his request was denied and he remains in custody. Colin also accepted a plea deal. Colin remained mostly calm throughout the trial. However, there were instances where he laughed, stuck out his tongue, or acted defiantly, suggesting underlying mental health issues. As a result, Colin was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In 2016, David Smith, a third defendant, also reached a deal. For his cooperation with police, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison and was eligible for parole after 12 years. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kimberly Proctor. Kimberly Proctor was born on January 1, 1992, in Langford, Canada. She came from a middle-class family. Her mother, Lucia, was a manager at Walmart, and her father, Fred, was a mechanic. Kimberly was known for her kind and loving nature, especially towards animals. She had several pets at home, including lizards, rabbits, mice, but her greatest love was for cats. Unfortunately, her fondness for cats led to years of bullying at school, where she often wore small cat ears, and this harassment continued for a long time. According to her mother, Kimberly faced bullying for most of her life. Kimberly's situation became more difficult when she was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, which made her more vulnerable to teasing. She began having panic attacks at school. As a result, her parents chose to enroll Kimberly in a different school. This school catered to young people with a variety of problems, including some who had been expelled from other schools for misbehavior. One of her classmates was Cruz Elwood, a boy who faced many challenges. Cruz lived with his mother. His father had been in prison since 2001 after being sentenced to 15 years for abusing and murdering a young girl. Cruz later admitted that he knew about his father's actions but did not want to talk about it. Despite his young age, Cruz was involved in drugs and had a history of stealing money from mailboxes. People who knew him described him as very intelligent. Another troubled student at the school was Cameron Moffat, a friend of Cruz's who was diagnosed with PTSD after being abused when he was 4 years old. Cameron had a difficult relationship with his parents, and neither medication nor counseling seemed to help. He often resisted treatment and began self-harming to cope with his anxiety. His aggressive behavior was evident both at home and at school, where he sometimes carried a knife. Cruz and Cameron met in the 5th grade and quickly became best friends. They did everything together, from skipping school to smoking marijuana. They also loved playing the computer game Warcraft and occasionally visited adult websites. Although their behavior at school was unpredictable, they were not seen as a serious threat. In February 2008, Cruz wrote a blog post about warning signs of a serial killer, listing common traits like cruelty to animals, a fascination with fire, parental abandonment, and a strong interest in violence. He pointed out that he fulfilled all 14 of the criteria he mentioned. By 2009, Kimberly had joined Cruz and Cameron's group, and they began to do everything together. When they weren't hanging out outside, they spent hours texting and chatting. During this time, Kimberly started dating Zach, who was friends with Cruz and Cameron. However, their relationship only lasted a couple of months before Zach decided to break up with her. This breakup upset Kimberly deeply, and she turned to her friends for support, spending long hours chatting online. During one of these conversations, Cameron revealed to Kimberly that he had feelings for her and thought she was beautiful. Kimberly appreciated the compliment but was only interested in Cruz, with whom she had grown closer after her breakup with Zach. Kimberly and Cruz began sharing their most private thoughts online, including secrets they had never revealed to anyone else. Kimberly opened up to Cruz about her honest feelings about her weight and height, and Cruz reassured her that she was beautiful just the way she was. However, Cruz and Cameron's lives began to take a dark and sinister turn. They began drinking blood and bodily fluids to see how they would feel. Cameron's friends said that he would sometimes lash out at his family and yell at his mother, while Cruz became increasingly aggressive toward his mother and defied any restrictions placed on him. Both boys began to have disturbing fantasies about being restrained and abused, leading them to explore adult websites with violent themes. Their discussions with Kimberly became increasingly disturbing. One day, Cameron made an innuendo-filled remark to Kimberly that upset her. When she shared this with Cruz, he responded by making the same suggestion. When Kimberly refused, Cruz threatened her ominously, saying, "Death is coming for you, and you will soon be dead." He then asked her about her plans for the next day. Cruz expressed interest in meeting her to discuss why some people were treating her so badly and other personal issues. They eventually agreed to call and meet the next day. She had no idea that Cruz had already contacted Cameron and they were exchanging messages about Kimberly. In Cameron and Cruz's conversation before the terrible events, they mentioned that they should proceed with their plan, saying that they have to be careful and that it will be interesting. They expressed their desire to do it immediately instead of waiting, saying that they will not harm her right away and can keep her alive but tied up. Later, Cameron and Cruz decide on a specific phrase to signal when to act to harm Kimberly. Cruz also suggests that they meet at the Ford bus stop at 10 o'clock. 18-year-old Kimberly accidentally found herself in a dangerous situation. That morning, Kimberly was still in bed while her mother, Lucia, prepared to leave for work. Before leaving, Lucia kissed Kimberly and expressed her love for her. Since Kimberly had no classes that day, her mother thought she would sleep in, especially since her only commitment was babysitting at 3 p.m. They had planned to start sewing Kimberly's prom dress together when Lucia returned home. However, Lucia was unaware that Kimberly had other plans. She had arranged to meet Cameron and Cruz at the bus station around 10:30 a.m. Kimberly got off the bus at the stop where her friends were waiting. Just minutes earlier, Cameron and Cruz had bought a can of gasoline as part of their terrifying plan. The three friends chatted for a while before heading to Cruz's house in Bali. Up until this point, everything seemed normal to Kimberly, and she had no idea of the terrifying situation her friends had planned for her. When they arrived at the house, Cruz used a code word to signal Cameron, and almost immediately, both attacked Kimberly, beating and kicking her. They bound her feet and ankles, stuffed a sock in her mouth, and taped it shut. Cameron and Cruz violently assaulted Kimberly for hours, ultimately causing her death by suffocation. Afterward, they desecrated her body in horrific ways, mutilating her and placing various items in her genital area before storing her in a freezer in Cruz's garage. Cruz attempted to cover his tracks and establish an alibi by sending her a message from his computer. In this message, he pretended to be far away and asked her if she had completed her work as a nanny, claiming he needed her advice. Cameron and Cruz's actions were extremely disturbing, and they treated it as a game. That same night, after committing the horrific act, Cruz texted his girlfriend, asking her to come out of the house to meet him. Fortunately, she refused, which may have saved her life. The next morning, Cameron and Cruz placed Kimberly's body in a hockey bag and calmly took a bus to a remote forested area. There, they doused the bag with gasoline and set it on fire. During this time, Cruz made the mistake of using his cell phone to send a message. Meanwhile, Kimberly's parents and relatives were in a state of panic, unaware of her whereabouts. Her mother, Lucia, had tried to call Kimberly the day before, but when her calls went directly to voicemail, she sensed something was wrong. Lucia went to the police station to report Kimberly missing, and the search for Kimberly quickly began. After causing Kimberly's death, both Cruz and Cameron continued their lives as if nothing had happened. Cruz spent the day at home with his girlfriend, while Cameron had lunch with his mother and grandmother. Then they took him to buy a new video game. That night, a young man who was hanging out with friends discovered charred body under a bridge. The body was burned beyond recognition. The body was later identified through dental records and was that of Kimberly. The tragic news devastated Kimberly's family and friends. Police arrived to investigate the crime scene. At the time, police had no leads to identify anyone responsible for this horrific crime. Kimberly's family and friends reported that she had no known conflicts with anyone and were puzzled as to who could have harmed her. In her memory, the family created a Facebook page, which police are closely monitoring in the hopes of uncovering any clues. They are also keeping a close eye on all of Kimberly's acquaintances. The story of the horrific incident shocked Canada, and every media outlet covered it. At the time, Cruz was eager to share his dark exploit with someone he trusted. He decided to use the in-game chat feature, believing that chat records were unlikely to be kept or checked. On March 23, 5 days after the murder, Cruz messaged a young girl from Halifax, urging her to read something important. He then sent her links to news articles about the incident to prove that he was telling the truth. The girl was horrified by what Cruz revealed but reacted the way he wanted, assuring him that she would always support him, no matter what his actions were. Cruz replied that that's why he trusted her, and he would repay her trust, no matter what. Suddenly, Cameron joined the conversation and backed up Cruz's account. The girl asked Cameron if he had any thoughts about Kimberly's family and friends and the lives he had impacted. Cameron simply replied that he felt no remorse for any of that. The young girl wrote to Cruz again, asking him not to repeat his previous actions. He promised he wouldn't. As time went on, the Cameron and Cruz their lives as if nothing had happened, but they kept a close eye on the investigation's progress. Their online chats and text messages mostly revolved around updates related to the case. Cruz confided to a friend that his father had advised him not to answer questions at school. This advice may have stemmed from his father's suspicion that Cruz was involved in Kimberly's death or knew who was responsible. An incident later occurred involving Samantha, one of Kimberly's close friends, who overheard Cruz making negative comments about Kimberly. Samantha asked him to stop, explaining that it still hurt her to hear such things so soon after Kimberly's death. In response, Cruz yelled that he did not care about Kimberly's death. Another student even reported hearing Cruz say that he was glad Kimberly was dead because he did not like her. At that point, Police began investigating Cameron and Cruz, leading to their questioning. Both admitted to seeing Kimberly on the morning she went missing, but said they didn't spend much time with her because she had to go to school. Police began monitoring Cameron and Cruz's online activities. Police obtained a warrant to install wiretaps in their home and both were placed under close surveillance. Their cell phones were also tapped and investigations into their devices were conducted. Disturbing evidence was discovered, including text messages exchanged between them in online chats. Police seized numerous documents related to their activities. Police believe Cruz and Cameron were responsible for Kimberly's death. Cameron and Cruz were then arrested and charged with Kimberly's murder. Both appeared calm and unresponsive. Cruz remained silent throughout the interrogation. Cameron, on the other hand, repeatedly taunted the police and refused to provide any information. He eventually confessed to his crimes in a cold manner. After Cameron's confession, Cruz was forced to admit everything. They both later pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and destruction of human remains. A year after the events of 2011, Cameron and Cruz appeared at their trial, appearing calm and talking animatedly to each other about the questions they were being questioned about. Throughout the hearing, they remained calm and unflinching. A psychological evaluation found that Cruz displayed characteristics of a rapist that were rare for his age and was at high risk of committing violent acts again. He was also diagnosed with clinical psychopathy. The psychiatrist indicated that Cruz would require intensive and prolonged supervision for at least the next 10 years. Cameron had a high rate of reoffending and serious mental health issues. During the hearing, the judge needed to decide whether to try both young men as adults and transfer them to an adult prison or to treat them as juveniles. It's important to note that the defense requested they be tried as adults, believing this would provide the boys with better educational and rehabilitation opportunities. Only Kimberly's parents were focused on seeking the death penalty for the Cameron and Cruz. However, Canada does not have a death penalty. If the young men are tried as adults, they would face life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. If Cruz and Cameron had been tried as juveniles, the maximum sentence they would have faced would have been 6 years, along with 4 years of community service. Cameron Moffat and Cruz Wellwood were then sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of appealing for bail after only 10 years. Kimberly's family has expressed their anger at the lenient sentence. Kimberly's father, Fred, expressed concern that Cameron and Cruz might continue their harmful behavior and that this was unacceptable. Fred pointed out that both had confessed to their actions but showed no remorse, which he believed justified their lifelong detention. Meanwhile, Pacific High School, which Kimberly and the two killers attended, has established a protocol for dealing with threats of violence. The protocol would allow police, schools, and social services to exchange information about students who might pose a threat in order to prevent tragic consequences. When asked why they had treated Kimberly's body that way, Cruz mentioned that for him, it was about finding the satisfaction he craved. And he felt a sense of power in taking someone's life. He shared that his life until then had felt empty and pointless, and this act gave him a sense of fulfillment. Cruz's first petition for parole was set for June 2019 but was postponed to August. The psychological evaluation conducted at that time was nearly identical to the initial assessment, indicating that Cruz was still completely unfit for parole. Consequently, the specialist did not recommend granting him release in 2020. His appeal was denied once more, meaning Cruz will have to wait until 2025 for another chance at parole. Sometimes people get a second chance, but this case should not have been given a second chance. It was clear that there was a deliberate intention to commit a terrible act. Individuals like Cameron and Cruz acted out their darkest fantasies without remorse. In fact, it was revealed that Kimberly was just one of 3 victims they targeted. Given the nature of their actions and the psychiatric evaluations, It is clear that Cameron and Cruz should not be allowed to live freely in society. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rosalia Jara. Rosalia Daniela Jara was born on September 12, 1997 in Fort Ole, a small town in the Vera department of Santa Fe, Argentina. She grew up in a close-knit family with limited means. Her mother, Liliana Jara, was the head of the family. Rosalia spent her childhood and adolescence in Fortin, where she attended primary school in a neighborhood called San Jose Obre. She aspired to become either a teacher or a police officer. She is known to be kind and thoughtful, especially to her family. When she was in 6th grade, she met Juan Oscar Valdez, a teacher, and they quickly secretly dated each other. At the time, she was only 13 years old, while Juan was 32 and married. Rosalia only shared this relationship with her sister, and her mother only found out when she became pregnant. After Rosalia gave birth to a daughter named Alma, Juan distanced himself and refused to acknowledge Alma's as his child. About a year later, Rosalia began living with a man named Aldo. There was a large age difference between them. This relationship did not go very well, and after another conflict, they decided to break up. On Saturday, July 1, 2017, Rosalia visited her mother Liliana, asking her to take care of her 2-year-old daughter, Alma. After that, Rosalia left home, taking very few belongings. Liliana assumed that Rosalia would be back soon, but that was not the case. That evening, Rosalia wears a red sports jacket, blue jeans, and new pink sneakers. Rumor has it that she went out to play cards with the US $20 she borrowed. She claimed she needed to make some money and wanted to try her luck. Around 9:00 p.m., Liliana called Rosalia, who said she was at a bar, enjoying the evening with friends while playing 5-card stud poker. She didn't mention anything concerning during their conversation, and this was the last time they spoke. Around 10:00 p.m., Rosalia was seen leaving a bar while talking on her cell phone and heading towards a checkpoint. After midnight, her mother, Liliana, tried repeatedly to reach her, but received no response. The following day, her mother went to the city police station to report her daughter, Rosalia, missing. Liliana found it unusual that she had not returned home, as Liliana knew how much her daughter valued family. However, the police were not interested in what Liliana said and refused to conduct a search. They argued that Rosalia, 19 years old, may have voluntarily left home. Days passed, and local authorities took no action to find Rosalia. A week after she went missing, local feminist groups organized a protest to pressure law enforcement. On the 11th day since she disappearance, authorities finally began search operations in Fort Ole and nearby areas. They conducted a careful search of the area and eventually discovered several items believed to belong to Rosalia. However, these findings did not help them find her. It is worth noting that after Rosalia went missing, most of the authorities' attention was focused on Juan. The police discovered that he left his home around 9 p.m. on July 1, driving a white Toyota Corolla, which partially matched the route Rosalia was believed to have taken. He returned home after 1 a.m. Witnesses near the bar reported seeing a similar white car with tinted windows around that time. Apparently, Juan was aware that the police suspected him of being involved in Rosalia's disappearance, which explains why he damaged his phone right before the authorities confiscated his phone. Rosalia's call history and phone location analysis revealed some important information, data related to Juan. On the night of her disappearance, there were about 20 calls between their 2 mobile numbers, most of which were initiated by Juan. Additionally, geolocation data from antenna signals indicated that Rosalia's and Juan's phones were close to each other at one point. Additionally, GPS data also showed that Juan's car was in the area during that time. Based on evidence and testimony from several witnesses, Juan was arrested in late July 2017. In early August 2017, the police organized a series of operations to clarify the chronology of incident related to Rosalia's disappearance. A representative of the Ministry of Security confirmed that during these operations, several searches took place simultaneously. One search took place at the local health department, while two others were organized at the homes of several police officers who were later suspected. The main goal of the search at the medical center was to find evidence suggesting that Rosalia may have had an abortion shortly before she went missing. However, this hypothesis was dismissed. Meanwhile, the search for Rosalia, the missing girl, continued. The main suspect, Juan, refused to testify about his relationship with her and about the many calls he made on the day she was last seen. In April 2018, during a hearing in the city of Vera, the judge rejected a request from Juan's lawyer to allow him to remain free. The judge decided that he should remain in custody indefinitely, as there was still a risk that he could influence witnesses. However, Juan's lawyer stated that the prosecution lacked evidence to link he to the crime. The lawyer emphasized that he had been cooperating with authorities from the start. The lawyer also dismissed the prosecution's claim that Juan intentionally damaged his phone to destroy evidence. On August 26, 2018, two hunters discovered human remains near a stream in the city of Londrina. The remains included a skull and several bone fragments. Alongside these, a pink sports jacket, sneakers, and other personal items believed to belong to the victim were found. Rosalia's family identified most of these items. The remains were sent to the Institute of Forensic Medicine for anthropological analysis. Police then went to the home of Aldo, Rosalia's ex-boyfriend, where she had lived prior to her disappearance. With Aldo's permission, they searched the house for a lock that matched a key found in the sports jacket's pocket. However, Aldo explained that he had to break the front door locks because he had not lived there for a long time and didn't know where his keys were. On September 8, 2018, investigative police officers conducted several procedures related to this case. The first procedure took place at the Municipal Health Service Department, where blood samples were taken from Liliana and her granddaughter Alma. The aim is to determine whether their DNA matches that of the remains that have been found. The Argentine Institute of Forensic Medicine confirmed that the remains found belonged to Rosalia, with a nearly 100% probability. Although forensic experts were unable to determine the cause of her death, it was clear that she had been murdered by violence, as evidenced by severe injuries to her left cheekbone, which had destroyed her skull. For Gustavo Monzon, the prosecutor in charge of the case, the evidence collected became a crucial step in the investigation. After completing all procedures, Rosalia's remains were returned to her family for burial. After it was confirmed that she had died from physical abuse, the State Attorney General's office decided to change the crime classification to homicide. More than a year and a half after her disappearance, the case finally moved to the public trial stage. In 2018, Juan Valdez was charged with Rosalia's murder. His lawyer has objected to this, arguing that the actual reasons for Rosalia's death were not determined. After hearing this, the court ordered the exhumation of her remains for further examination. Several months later, the original judge was dismissed due to allegations of bias against Juan. On July 2, 2019, the new judge began reviewing the case and denied Juan's attorney's request to revoke the pretrial detention order. Local media have been regularly reporting on key points in the investigation. In particular, Attorney General Gustavo Monzon has suggested that Juan killed Rosalia simply because she asked for child support for Alma, whom Juan acknowledged as his child. Gustavo claimed that just a day before Rosalia's disappearance, she had called Juan to voice her frustrations about his refusal to help with child support. Returning to the trial, it is important to clarify the prosecution's main hypothesis. On Saturday, July 1, 2017, while Juan's wife was away, he contacted Rosalia, to discuss their meeting. As previously mentioned, he and she had multiple phone calls that day, with the last call initiated by Juan. This call lasted no more than 30 seconds, but it was enough for he to specify the exact time and place for their meeting. It is believed that when he met she, he used force to make her get into his car and turned off her mobile phone. From that moment on, her phone no longer had a signal. According to the timeline created by the prosecutors, Juan drove towards the municipality of Landry. At some point during the drive, he allegedly struck Rosalia on the head, leading to her death. He then drove a few more kilometers to a stream to dispose of her body. During the hearing, the prosecutor presented all the evidence related to the case. In addition to the report from the experts of the Institute of Forensic Medicine, the prosecution had witness testimony, autopsy reports, DNA analysis results, and forensic reports. The case documents include information from telephone company, such as call records, text messages, and geolocation information. This information fully corroborates the main version of the prosecution. Additionally, the prosecutor's team had testimony from Juan's 20-year-old stepdaughter, Macarena. She said that Juan left home around 9 p.m. that night, and she did not see him return. This contradicts Juan's testimony, which states that on the day of the incident, he went to bed early and did not leave the house. Another piece of indirect evidence presented by the prosecution was related to Juan's inappropriate behavior towards teenage girls. This evidence was based on the testimony of a female student. She reported that he had subjected her to indecent acts when she was just 12 years old. Additionally, there was other evidence that Juan had problems at the school, where he occasionally taught, all related to his relationships with minors. In November 2019, Rosalia's family changed their lawyer. By March 2020, their new lawyer, Caroline Walker, stated that after reviewing the case documents, she discovered that the investigation had overlooked several important elements. Curiously, Juan was not prosecuted for sexually assaulting Rosalia, even though their romantic relationship started long before she turned 18. Caroline also realized that as she gathered evidence against Juan, he was clearly a dangerous predator. For this reason, she did not rule out the possibility of future cases related to these crimes. The main trial took place at the Vera Municipal Court on Tuesday, July 7, 2020. This was 3 years after the disappearance and 2 years after the discovery of Rosalia's remains. Only the main representatives of the parties attended the trial. Other members, journalists, and many experts were in other rooms of the court. Given the case's significance and the announced restrictions, various feminist groups supporting Rosalia's family requested authorities to broadcast the trial daily. In his opening speech, Prosecutor Gustavo stated that he would seek a life sentence for Juan. There were several reasons for this decision, the most important of which was that Rosalia had been in an unequal relationship with him. Juan not only controlled her, but also dominated her in social relationships. Furthermore, he has consistently failed to acknowledge their common child, Alma. Therefore, the punishment Gustavo proposed, that is, life imprisonment, was entirely appropriate to the extent of the damage Juan had caused to all members of Rosalia's family. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalia's family, criticized the authorities for their initial response when Rosalia was reported missing. She noted that the authorities were initially not proactive in searching for Rosalia and did not take the case seriously. Additionally, she stressed that Rosalia's remains were not discovered by law enforcement officers, but were found by 2 hunters. She also said that in her opinion, a police officer informed Juan about the investigation. This led to some important information being leaked, which could have helped him disappear just before his arrest. The trial lasted about a month and featured around 100 expert testimonies. Details of the phone calls between Rosalia and Juan on the day of her disappearance were also presented. It was revealed that he made the last call shortly after she left the bar, and her phone was turned off soon after. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar white car near the bar that evening. Juan was also seen leaving the house around 9:00 p.m., and a while later he came back. Prosecutors argued that this brief time frame was sufficient for him to commit the crime and dispose of the evidence. Additionally, another important piece of evidence was geolocation data from the phones, which showed that Juan and Rosalia's phones were in close proximity for a period of time. The prosecution delivered a strong closing argument, presenting both direct and indirect evidence that confirmed Juan Valdez's guilt in the crime. They firmly believed that Rosalia's life was ended due to a violent act by he, although the exact cause of death was not determined. But forensic experts believed that she could have died from a severe blow to the left cheekbone. Juan also had the opportunity to defend himself. He attempted to dispute all the evidence presented by the authorities, particularly denying allegations that he intentionally damaged his mobile phone. Furthermore, Juan argued that the authorities had made a serious mistake by focusing on him, which had led to a failure to identify who had actually harmed Rosalia. On August 3, 2020, the much-awaited verdict was announced. The court found Juan Oscar Valdez guilty on all charges. He listened to his sentence with his eyes downcast. Outside the courtroom, many young people from various human rights organizations had gathered to show support for Rosalia's family and to follow the trial's progress. Shortly after the guilty verdict, Juan's lawyer filed an appeal against the trial court's decision. During the appeal, Juan's lawyer argued that the prosecution had not presented clear evidence to prove that Rosalia had actually gotten into Juan's car on the day she disappeared. Additionally, the lawyer also argued that Aldo, her last boyfriend, whom she had accused of sexual assault, was the one people should suspect. The defense also stressed that the fact that Juan had a daughter with Rosalia did not prove that he had a motive to commit a serious crime. The prosecution aimed to counter the arguments made by Juan's lawyer. They said that from the beginning of the investigation, they considered many theories, but all were discarded when the evidence pointed to Juan as the perpetrator. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalia's family, agreed with the prosecution's position. On October 7, 2021, the Vera Court of Appeals issued a unanimous 3-judge decision. They did not accept the appeal and request to overturn the sentence that Juan's lawyer had filed. Therefore, the previous judgment of the trial court, according to which Juan was sentenced to life in prison, remained in place. In addition, the prosecutor's office was asked to conduct an internal investigation into the misconduct of some of the police officers involved. Rosalia's case became a symbol of solidarity and feminist movements in the northern province of Santa Fe. It highlighted the issue of gender violence in local media and sparked discussions during political debates. Although Rosalia's family achieved justice, it did not erase their pain. Hi everyone. Thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Veronica Youngblood. 30 years old, Veronica Youngblood originally came from Argentina. The exact timing of her move to the United States is unclear, but she grew up in poverty. At the young age of 16, she gave birth to her first daughter, Sharon. At that time, she started working as a call girl to support herself and earn money. In 2007, she met Ronald Youngblood, a pilot in the U.S. Navy, who was one of her clients. They quickly started dating, and in 2009, they got married in Las Vegas. Marrying Ronald brought stability to Veronica's life, offering her a home, a supportive husband, and assistance in caring for her daughter. A few years later, in 2012, Veronica and Ronald welcomed a daughter together named Brooklyn. Sharon is described as a sweet and kind girl who is always willing to help others. She is currently in 10th grade at Octina High School and participates in figure skating. Coach Lynette Carroll, who has coached she for about 4 years, commented that she is a persistent and hardworking athlete who has performed well in competitions. Sharon was a good student with a bright future ahead of her. She often talks about her dream of becoming a singer and has a great group of friends, which makes her popular. Brooklyn, 5, is a smart, loving little girl who loves animals. She is adored by her family. However, the relationship between her parents, Veronica and Ronald, is strained. They often argued, which prompted the police to intervene. In 2014, while Ronald and his family were in Honduras, she called the local police to report that she and Ronald had a disagreement, during which he became physically violent. During this time, the family said Ronald began to suspect Veronica of having an affair. After that, their relationship deteriorated, and some people said he became more domineering, jealous, and possessive. They said that while in Honduras, he began denying his wife access to transportation, money, and even the internet. At one point, Veronica sought assistance from the U.S. Embassy to facilitate her emergency return to the United States, which was granted. After their time in Honduras, Ronald was assigned to the Navy Department in Washington, D.C., and they moved to Florida. There, they effectively separated, but continued to live together. Following their time in Florida, they relocated with their children to Oakton, Virginia, and began divorce proceedings. They continued to live in the same house though, possibly because they wanted to raise their two daughters together and because Veronica was unemployed, so could not afford to live independently. However, the divorce proceedings and child custody battle put further strain on their relationship. During this process, Veronica applied for student loans and named Ronald as a guarantor without his consent. This led to a number of disputes. By September 2016, the court decided that they could continue living together in Oakton and have joint custody of their daughter Brooklyn, without either party having to pay alimony. In October 2016, Ronald filed for a protective order to protect himself from Veronica. He alleged that she took his phone and threw it in the toilet, poured water on his laptop, and scratched his car. As a result, the court ordered she to move out of their shared home and maintain a distance of 500 feet from Ronald and Brooklyn until a hearing, scheduled for 2 weeks later. The hearing was finalized on October 31, 2016, and the divorce was finalized. After the hearing, Veronica most likely moved back into the marital home because she and Ronald began living together again. Everything went smoothly until March 2018, when Ronald and Veronica failed to appear in court. They filed a joint consent form for a 14 years project that stated they both wanted to move to Sedalia, Missouri, with their two daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, in August 2018. They chose Missouri because that's where most of Ronald's family lives. The agreement that the two signed and filed with the court stated that Veronica would be given her own apartment, 30 miles away from Ronald's home, and that he would be responsible for paying rent for the next 3 years. During this period, they would share joint custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The court approved this arrangement, and the move was planned. However, on April 13, 2018, she changed her mind about moving, hired a new lawyer, and sought to change the custody agreement. She explained that her situation had changed since the initial agreement was filed. Veronica said she had gotten a good-paying job and would work full-time, but to do this, she needed to stay in Virginia. She also said that she was in the process of buying her own home so that she could live independently of Ronald without his support. In her revised request, she sought full custody of Brooklyn, with the intention of letting their daughter live with her. The dispute between Ronald and Veronica was adjudicated in July 2018. The decision was made that there was no change. Both parties still had to move to Missouri as previously agreed. By August 2018, the judge refused to change the decision, and both parties signed this document to agree. 10 days later, Ronald notified the court of his new address in Missouri, where he planned to move in mid-August 2018. Sadly, this move would never take place. On August 5, 2018, 911 operator Jennifer Hoffman received a call from a 15-year-old girl who was crying out in pain. Sharon pleaded for help, saying she has just been attacked. When Jennifer asked who attacked her, she responded, her mother, Veronica. Sharon said her mother came into room while she and her younger sister, Brooklyn, were sleeping. Her mother said she was going to take her to God, then attacked her. Jennifer tried to reassure Sharon, informing her that help was on the way and to stay calm. However, Jennifer then heard the girl screaming and moaning in pain, repeatedly pleading. She said she didn't want to die. Please help her. Finally, in the evening, the rescue team arrived at the apartment on Lincoln Street. They found Sharon alive, with 2 wounds, one in the back and one in the chest. Tragically, her little sister Brooklyn was discovered dead in her bed due to injury to the head. Sharon was still alive at the time, but in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, she did not survive. She fought bravely, but died just a few days later. When police arrived at the scene, they did not find Ronald or Veronica. Later that evening, they located Veronica. She went to a friend's house and knocked on the door, with a gun in her hand. Her friend called 911, leading to her swift detention. Upon her arrest, officers discovered she still had the gun with her and was driving a rental car. The police also found 2 ammunition magazines for the weapon. During her interrogation just a few hours later, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun with plans to kill her daughters, Ronald and Veronica. Then she will die too. She mentioned that she was unhappy with her life, but did not elaborate further. The police later learned that immediately after the shootings, she called Ronald to inform him that she had killed their daughters, and she intended to die as well, adding that she hated him. During the police interrogation, Veronica confessed to her guilt. When the investigator asked what punishment she thought she deserved, she stated it should be the death penalty. Although Virginia has abolished the death penalty, the officers present during the interrogation noted that she spoke in a flat, emotionless manner throughout. As a result, she was charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of her 2 children. At her initial court hearing, she indicated that she did not require a public defender and did not want to hire a private attorney. However, eventually, she hired a lawyer. And at her plea hearing, she pleaded guilty, citing insanity. Veronica delayed each court hearing in her case. The next hearing was pushed back for several months because she repeatedly refused to leave prison to attend. Ultimately, the murder trial began in March 2023. Recently, the prosecution argued that she was not insane. Instead, they claimed she had carefully planned the murders of her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, as revenge against her ex-husband, Ronald. The murder occurred just days before Brooklyn and Ronald moved to Missouri. Veronica had just gone through a difficult divorce and was trying to get revenge. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline, demonstrating the premeditation behind the crimes. 9 days before the murders, Veronica attended a local gun show and purchased a gun. Prosecutors allege she did this with the intention of killing both her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn. On the day before the shootings, Sharon asked Veronica if her mother had planned to kill her and Brooklyn, and if so, that would be horrible. The prosecution contended that Veronica had been plotting the murders for several days. On the day of the crime, they claimed she gave both children chewing gum laced with sleeping pills to incapacitate them. She then went into each room and attacked each of his daughters. During the investigation, it was discovered that Veronica had attacked Brooklyn in the head, causing her instant death. For Sharon, after the first attack, little girl woke up and started screaming. She asked her mother why she had shot her, and her mother replied that little girl was going to see God. Veronica then struck her again in the chest and left the apartment. Finally, Veronica called Ronald and left a voice message saying, "She killed Brooklyn, she killed Sharon, and she will die. She hates him. Goodbye." The prosecution alleged that Veronica was a liar and a manipulator. They said she caused chaos and shirked responsibility for her own gain. They described her as cruel, selfish, vengeful, and calculating. They claimed that she planned and executed the murder plot to get revenge on her ex-husband, Ronald. The defense, on the other hand, argued that she was suffering from psychological problems. They said she had been abused by a cruel man who had physically and mentally abused her. The defense claimed that Ronald never loved her and that she had suffered abuse since childhood. The lawyers again pointed to the poverty that Veronica and her younger sister lived in. They said she had suffered abuse from her grandfather and daily beatings from her parents, to the point where she was at one point unable to walk. Her father would often beat her with tree branches, belts, and brooms. After years of living in such cruel conditions, her parents abandoned she and her younger sister without a word, leaving them to fend for themselves. Then, Veronica was forced to turn to sex work to provide for her daughter and support her sister. During the proceedings, her younger sister gave a statement in which mentions that since childhood, she has followed a South American religion called Umbanda. This religion believes in the existence of a supreme creator, the ability to communicate with the spirits of the dead, and the concept of reincarnation, spiritual growth through various practices. The defense used this information to argue that Veronica believed she had the ability to communicate with the dead. The defense argued that Veronica had suffered abuse and neglect in her past, and that in addition to these factors, she suffered from severe mental illness. She reported having heard voices throughout her life. At trial, she claimed that she had heard voices that night, leading her to believe that she had to kill her daughters. The defense argued that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. They asserted that she was terrified that her children would experience the same abuse she endured as a child if they were separated from her. Veronica's defense team said she went to the police and asked for the death penalty. This shows that she intends to die. During the trial, various witnesses, including doctors who attempted to save Sharon's life and people who knew Veronica, Ronald during their marriage, provided testimony. One of the witnesses was Manuel, a defense attorney, who met Veronica by chance at the time of the incident. He shared that they met in the summer of 2018, and when they first met, she seemed calm and composed. However, by the end of July, things had changed. Manuel said that in late July, Veronica shared with him that she had lost her nursing job, which would have prevented her from moving to Missouri, as she had said in court. During their conversations, she expressed a desire for a more serious relationship, but he responded that he was not ready for a serious relationship. Therefore, the two decided to end their relationship at that time. A few days later, she sent him a text claiming she was pregnant with his child. On July 31st, he visited her home to discuss the pregnancy. Upon arrival, he noticed the apartment was dark, lit only by candles, which created a romantic atmosphere. Although they talked, but he soon left because he felt unsafe. He said that after that conversation, he no longer trusted Veronica's word about her pregnancy. He didn't believe anything she said. It is highly unlikely that she was pregnant, as there were no reports from the prison indicating that she had given birth or experienced a miscarriage. After their conversation, Manuel instructed his lawyer to send Veronica a letter, telling her not to contact him again. He mentioned that he saw she again on August 5, when she appeared at his doorstep. She was calm and seemed cold, asking to come in. However, he refused to open the door and asked her to leave. Veronica advised Manuel to call the police, as they were looking for her. When he inquired why the police were looking for her, she revealed, because she just killed her daughters. At that point, she pulled a gun from her belt and explained her actions to him. Following this, he called 911 to report her location. During the trial, the focus turned to Sharon's 911 call, in which little girl told the dispatcher that she was dying because her mother had just attacked her. At that moment, Veronica stood up and cried out. Veronica couldn't take it anymore. The judge decided to adjourn the trial and informed the jury that Veronica had asked for a waiver because she had interrupted the hearing. Veronica then testified, with tears streaming down her face, about the trauma she had endured. The jury and several others in attendance were moved to tears as she shared the horrors of her life. Ronald attended the trial. He also took the stand to speak about how wonderful his daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, were, expressing his deep love for them and his devastation over the incident. The prosecution's strong arguments convinced the jury to find Veronica guilty. She purchased the gun 9 days before the murder and had given her daughters sleeping medication beforehand, leaving them defenseless. This clearly indicated that she had planned the act well in advance. It was not a spontaneous decision made in a moment of madness. On the final day, she followed through with her plan, reinforcing that this was not an impulsive act. Veronica claimed that she was mentally ill and did not intend to commit the crime. She had endured abuse throughout her life, which contributed to her mental health struggles. She believed that her actions were meant to protect her daughters from the same abuse she experienced as a child. After a 2-week trial, the jury began their deliberations and returned the next day with a verdict. They determined that Veronica was not insane at the time of the crime and found her guilty of first-degree murder for the deaths of Brooklyn and Sharon, as well as for using a firearm during the commission of the crime. During the sentencing phase, the jury decided that prison was the appropriate consequence for Veronica. Upon hearing her sentence, Veronica reacted with anger, shouting, "No, no," and leaping from her chair. Court officials had to escort her out of the courtroom. Then, she was taken back to prison under special surveillance. A few days later, the jury returned to impose a sentence of 36 years in prison for each murder and an additional 3 years for each firearm offense. In total, Veronica will serve 78 years in prison. Throughout their relationship, Ronald and Veronica both caused each other harm. She may have had some psychological issues, believing that harming her daughters would get back at her ex-husband, Ronald. However, he is not without fault either, and many of Veronica's past experiences likely shaped her personality and her relationship with he. If Veronica feared her daughters would suffer the same abuse she endured as a child, it's important to note that she had full custody of Sharon, and only Brooklyn had to leave. She needed to move to Missouri, a plan she had agreed upon with Ronald. If she had followed through with this move, Brooklyn would not have been so far away from her. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Benno Neumayer. In today's story, we focus on the Neumayer family, who live in Balna, a city in northern Italy. The family consists of parents Peter Neumayer and Laura Perselli. Their son Benno is 30 years old, and their daughter Maid is 27 years old. Benno is a doctor who has completed his university education and is dedicated to fitness. His father, Peter, is 63 years old, and his mother, Laura, is 68 years old, both retired from teaching at school. Despite their age, they are still active in social and cultural activities. The family is respected in the community. On January 4, 2021, Laura and Peter suddenly disappeared. They were last seen that morning when they went to the supermarket. Laura was planning to visit her mother, who had just returned home from the hospital. Laura rode her bike to her mother's house. A few hours later, Laura's sister sent her a short video of their sick mother, but Laura never opened the message. At the same time, Laura's daughter Maid was on vacation with a friend outside the city and sent her mother a photo but received no response. Benno called his mother at 8:30 that evening, but she did not answer. 3 minutes later, he sent a voice message to his girlfriend, Martina, expressing his concern that he had not been able to reach his parents. He told her that he would be at her house in about an hour or two for dinner as planned, and that he would be late. Benno asked her to call him back later on a regular phone line instead of WhatsApp because he did not have an internet connection. Martina called him back shortly afterwards, and they arranged to meet at 10:12 p.m. When Benno arrived at her house in his father's car, he said he had forgotten to shower. He went to wash his face and asked Martina if she could do his laundry. She didn't ask any questions and agreed to help. Benno gave Martina a bag full of dirty clothes. She didn't check the contents and threw them in the washing machine. The couple then had a great evening at the bar and a passionate night at her house. Benno didn't leave his girlfriend's house until 5:30 a.m. When he was with her at around 11 p.m., he sent his mother a short text message wishing her a good night. He noticed that she hadn't read it, but he was too busy that evening to think about it. Early in the morning of January 5, Laura's sister came to her house. She knocked on the door and rang the bell, but there was no response. It was clear that no one was home. Laura's sister was worried and called Benno to ask about Laura and Peter. However, Benno said he was not home and did not know where they were. Laura's sister was busy taking care of her sick mother and could not leave her alone, so she asked Benno to try to find them. Benno promised to help and suggested that their parents might have gone to the mountains, as they often did. He advised them to wait a few days. Meanwhile, Laura's daughter, Maid, was at the resort with her friend and boyfriend. She noticed that her messages had been ignored, which made her suspicious. She called her dad and was surprised when he didn't answer. His social media pages also showed unread messages, and she couldn't reach her parents, which made her even more worried. So Maid called her brother Benno, who said he was walking his dog in the mountains a few kilometers away from their parents' house, and he couldn't check on them. He seemed worried throughout the call, and his story sounded strange. The dog was very old and sick, barely moving even in their yard, so it was hard to believe he could hike several kilometers into the mountains with the dog. Unable to get more information from Benno, Maid decided to ask a neighbor who lived next door to her parents for help around 1:30 p.m. The neighbor was home, so she agreed to check on her parents. The neighbor knocked on the door, and Benno opened it. At that time, the neighbor was still on the phone with Maid. She immediately recognized her brother's voice and was surprised that he had just refused her request to check on her parents. Benno explained that he had rushed back to his parents' house after walking the dog and was now home. Benno said that their parents were not home and insisted that he did not know where they had gone. Maid called all the hospitals in the city because she had a strong feeling that something was wrong with her parents. Eventually, Maid stopped her outing and returned home. She asked Benno if he knew what had happened to their parents, but he said he did not know. He explained that he had spent the previous day with his girlfriend and had only returned home in the morning when their parents were no longer there. Feeling desperate, Maid decided to contact the police to report her parents missing. At this point, Benno began to discourage her from calling the police. He seemed to be stalling for time, but he suggested another approach that he thought would be more effective. So he contacted a friend who was a police officer for advice on how to handle the situation. Benno's friend suggested contacting a search and rescue service that specialized in mountain rescue, but that didn't help either. In the end, Maid decided to go to the police himself, regardless of whether Benno supported her decision or not. He eventually agreed, and they went to the police station together. The young man told them about his parents' disappearance and suggested that they might have gone into the mountains. He mentioned that an avalanche had occurred in the area they frequented about a day after they left. He believed that his mother and father might have been buried under the snow. This explanation seemed plausible to the police and became the main focus of the investigation. Laura and Peter were declared missing, and search teams were deployed to the site of the avalanche. Trained dogs were used to search. Despite a thorough search, it took a long time to cover the entire area. The police decided to interview Benno to gather more information. They noticed that he was evasive and increasingly uncomfortable when asked difficult questions, making his behavior seem suspicious. After leaving the office, Benno suddenly displayed a sudden and inexplicable aggression. He attributed this outburst to hunger, fatigue, and stress. The next day, there was still no news from the police about Peter and Laura, prompting Maid to return to the station. Benno tried to stop her again, insisting that the police needed more time to conduct the search. During this time, Another girl named Jasmine contacted Benno. It turned out he was chatting with 3 other people on Tinder, and he was particularly interested in Jasmine, and he showed little interest in the ongoing investigation. On January 6, Maid returned to the police station. It had been 2 days since her parents had gone missing. Laura and Peter had not contacted her, which made her believe that something had happened to her parents. They usually informed her before they went into the mountains and would prepare carefully for such trips. She felt the need to conduct a more thorough search of the area near their home. The police were actively involved from the beginning. Initially, they focused on the possibility that the couple had gone missing in the mountains. During this time, Benno went to the supermarket with his new girlfriend, Jasmine, where he bought a large amount of hydrogen peroxide, explaining that he needed it to prepare to sell his father's car. Search teams along with volunteers were organized to search the areas outside the mountains and around Laura. Despite the large resources and the participation of about 600 people in the search effort, Peter and Laura were still missing. Everyone worked together in the hope of finding them quickly. Finally, Maid expressed her concerns. She thought about Benno's strange behavior and the fact that their parents had disappeared shortly after she left the city for a short time. During that time, Benno was supposed to be with them, and their relationship was complicated. She suspected that he might know more than he was letting on. The police decided to question Benno again. This time, during questioning, he was overly friendly, which was surprising given his violent reaction after his previous encounter with the police. The officers suspected that he was deliberately controlling his demeanor to avoid revealing any important information. During this time, suspicions grew that Peter and Laura were likely dead, and it was believed that the couple's son, Benno, might be involved. Benno became the prime suspect. Maid regularly contacted the police, sharing information about Benno and their parents. Benno's behavior was often so rude and aggressive that Laura was afraid to be home alone with him. On January 7, the police tracked Benno down. That day, Jasmine and Benno got into the family car and went to a hardware store where they bought rags, cleaning supplies, a bucket, and hydrogen peroxide. While Benno asked Jasmine to pay for the items, they stopped at a car wash before heading home. The police arrested them there and found all the items they had purchased in the trunk of the car. The car was impounded for further investigation. The police also attempted to confiscate Benno's jacket, but he refused to hand it over. Benno was questioned again that day. Ultimately, he did not provide any useful information, and since there was no evidence against him, he was released. Although the police confiscated the cleaning kit, Benno and Jasmine decided to clean the house. Benno asked her to wear the jacket the police had asked to confiscate. She did not suspect anything and agreed. After a short while, he took the jacket off Jasmine and put it away. Later that day, the police arrested Jasmine, thinking she might be involved in the case. They questioned her for hours about Peter and Laura's disappearance, but could not find any evidence to link her to the crime. Jasmine is later confronted by the Carabinieri police several times during interrogation, including when Benno's jacket is confiscated. Her hair and skin particles are found on the jacket, forcing her to prove her innocence. She explains that she helped Benno clean the house and wore the jacket, but she was unaware of the implications and risk of harm to herself. On January 17, Maid returns to her parents' house and finds Benno there. She decides to voice her suspicions, which leads to an altercation between them. Maid suggests that Benno may be involved in Peter and Laura's disappearance. He becomes hysterical, shaking as he tries to convince her that she is mistaken. He eventually swears that he had nothing to do with it. Despite his assurances, she remains suspicious of Benno, knowing he is a good liar. Benno tries to justify his actions. However, Maid knew about his troubled relationship with their parents and his aggressive nature. He was the only one capable of causing harm to their loved ones. On January 18, Benno was the prime suspect in the case. The police suspected that he had killed his parents and then hidden their bodies. But the police lacked solid evidence. They only found a small blood stain on the car, not enough to confirm the death of his parents. However, the investigation continued. Important information came to light when Benno's phone was confiscated and examined. Geolocation data from the phone was examined on the evening when Peter and Laura went missing. The data showed that Benno had left the city and stopped near the bridge on the Adige River, where he stayed for a considerable amount of time. The police believed that he may have dumped their bodies there. This location became the focus of the search for evidence. On February 6, 2021, a search operation was launched in the Adige River. Police quickly located Laura's body. However, her husband, Peter, had been missing for more than 3 months. He was finally found on April 27, after Laura's body was discovered on the riverbank. A brown stain that looked like blood was found on the bridge over the river. Forensic experts analyzed the sample and confirmed that it was Peter's blood. Surveillance camera footage captured Benno's car on the evening of the incident as he returned from the bridge to his ex-girlfriend Martina's house, confirming that he was at the scene where the bodies were found. Peter's body was found by forensic experts in relatively good condition. A layer of algae had formed on it, slowing down decomposition, and the cold temperature helped preserve the tissues. This made it easy to spot signs of strangulation on both Peter and his wife. Marks on their necks indicated that they had been attacked from behind. The cause of death was confirmed to be strangulation, and it was determined that they had been thrown into the river after they were dead, as there was no water in their lungs. Given Benno's strong and muscular physique, he was able to overpower his elderly parents without much difficulty. After his parents' bodies were found, Benno admitted that he was involved in their deaths. On the night of the incident, he had an argument with Peter. Benno tried to avoid the argument by locking himself in his room, but his father barged in and continued the argument. In a fit of rage, Benno attacked his father with a rope and strangled him. When Laura heard the noise and went upstairs, he feared that she would call the police, so he strangled her as well. Although his confession seemed credible, his motives seemed too weak to justify such a brutal act. Benno explained that his relationship with his parents had become increasingly strained in the months leading up to the incident, marked by frequent arguments after he moved back in with them. Benno had begun paying rent at his father's request. However, due to the constant arguments, his father decided that it would be best if Benno moved out. He began to encourage his son to rent his own apartment, but Benno refused. To pressure him to move, his father increased the rent to €700, which Benno considered excessive and unfair. That evening, Peter called him a loser for spending too much time on the computer and forced him to walk the dog. Another argument broke out. This conflict escalated into a tragic situation. Benno claims that his father was the first to confront him, trying to kick him out of the house. As a result, Benno felt he had no choice but to defend himself. The investigation revealed that immediately after the murder, Benno began to create an alibi. He called his mother's cell phone, pretending to go looking for her. After the murder, he asked Martina to wash his clothes to erase any evidence. Although she handed the washed clothes over to the police, no incriminating marks were found on them. Police believe that his efforts to conceal the evidence indicate a deliberate act. Not only did Benno understand what he was doing, but he also tried to avoid consequences for this brutal crime. Benno attempted to explain his actions by claiming that he was mentally disturbed and affected by the attack. However, his calm demeanor and careful efforts to conceal evidence of the crime showed that he was fully aware of his actions. After his arrest, psychiatrists evaluated him and determined that he had a personality disorder characterized by narcissism and social problems. He had recently had frequent sudden outbursts of anger, which doctors attributed to his steroid use. Benno began taking additional medication. This led to a significant deterioration in his mental state, due to hormonal changes, leading to increased aggression and a complete loss of self-control. Maid said that he would often attack her when angry and was often violent with other family members. On one occasion, she suffered multiple bruises as a result of his aggression. Even as a child, Benno tried to strangle her, but their parents were present at the time. In 2020, Benno entered a relationship with a girl named Nadine, and they moved to Germany together. A friend noted that at first, Benno was very attentive and caring. However, over time, his behavior became controlling, showing signs of selfishness and abusive tendencies. He tried to create distance between Nadine and her family, isolating her from her parents and friends, leaving her to spend most of her time alone. Things got worse when in June 2020, Nadine discovered that Benno had used her credit card without permission and stolen money from her account. This betrayal prompted Nadine to end the relationship. She called Benno's parents and insisted that they pick up their son from her apartment. His parents had to drive to pick him up. Just a day after their return, Benno made amends with Nadine, promising to pay her back and asking her parents to let him go home to Nadine. While Nadine was at work, he sent her a selfie showing him covered in blood. Benno claimed he had gotten into a fight with a friend named Dean. However, Dean was in another part of town at the time and did not see Benno. Benno sent some of the photos to his mother, Laura, who was concerned. She contacted a friend for advice. The friend suggested that Benno could be dangerous and advised Laura not to go to his apartment alone. Laura suspected that Benno's mental health had deteriorated due to his use of anabolic steroids. Benno was eventually taken away, and it was discovered that he had been self-harming due to hallucinations. After this incident, Nadine decided not to see him again, but he was discharged after only 3 days. During his stay, doctors did not have enough time to carry out all the necessary tests to diagnose his condition. It was suspected that Benno was schizophrenic, and his family insisted on further testing, but he refused and began taking medication for schizophrenia. By the time Benno's trial began, he had been diagnosed with acute polymorphic psychotic disorder rather than schizophrenia. This misdiagnosis meant that he was taking the wrong medication, which likely worsened his mental condition. While on steroids, he was taking a dangerous cocktail of drugs that affected his behavior. Immediately before the murder, Benno was released from the psychiatric hospital and returned home. During this time, his mother became extremely concerned for his safety. She hid all the knives in the house and locked the doors at night. She believed that as long as she did not provoke him, everything would be fine, so she tried to avoid arguments and limit her interactions with him. Unfortunately, this did not protect her from a tragic end. On November 19, 2022, Benno Neumayer was sentenced to life in prison. However, his lawyer quickly appealed the decision, arguing that Benno was insane due to a combination of negative factors that worsened his mental condition. To support the defense's claims, several independent medical assessments were conducted, which found him mentally stable. The prosecution pointed out that Benno acted deliberately, as he tried to create an alibi and conceal his actions. Just minutes after the murder, he called his girlfriend, pretending to be worried about his parents' absence. He ruthlessly deceived those around him, sending messages to his deceased mother, deceiving his sister and neighbors, all to escape justice. After the retrial, Benno's life sentence was upheld and remains in effect. The murders of Peter and Laura received considerable media attention in Italy and caused widespread public fear,